Chapter 321. Divination. Grim roared in shock. You said you gave up all your abilities in exchange for a divination spell. That's what you said. Alice said matter-of-factly. Destiny witches follow the guidance of fate. Is it wrong of me to do so? But I didn't ask you to give up everything, did I? Grim felt like he was going crazy. You even gave up your spatial talent? Then what will you rely on to fight for the battle of fate in 8 years? Of course it's fate, Alice said proudly. You still don't know? My divination spell is very effective. Grim was silent. In the past, he had treated those people who made predictions all day long as charlatans. But now, those people had become lunatics in his eyes. Of course, that included this idiot in front of him. It was really unexpected. When Alice was advancing to become a wizard, she actually sacrificed everything in exchange for the favor of fate. Everything she gave up, including her awakened spatial talent. Alice became a wizard without a hitch. But she had lost all of her abilities. All she had left was a divination that she had no idea how to use. According to Grimm's original plan, he hoped that Alice could infinitely strengthen her destiny, which profession, and walk the supporting path. But at least that should be after the battle of fate. In the early stage, she should find ways to strengthen her fighting ability, and after winning the battle of fate, she would consider changing classes. This was the safest way to develop. Now that she had lost all her abilities, what would she rely on to win against her competitors in 8 years? A witch who could only use divination spells. Grim covered his face, and the more he thought about it, the more frustrated he became. God, you're not playing with me, are you? My void stone, my investment in the early stage. Just like that. It was all for naught. Perhaps she was frightened by Grimm's resentful eyes, but Alice, who had a smug look on her face, finally knew how to be timid. She timidly moved in front of Grim, grabbed his robe, and gently shook it. Don't worry, my divination spell is very effective. I will definitely be able to protect myself. Grim let out a silent sigh and finally shifted his attention to the divination that Alice had repeatedly mentioned. What kind of abilities does your divination have now? It can answer some of my questions, and it can help me find things. Alice stuttered. Oh, what a powerful ability. Grim wanted to cover his face and burst into tears again. Then tell me, where is the legendary pendulum of misfortune? Grim thought for a while and looked at Alice expectantly. Fine. Losing the ability to fight is losing the ability to fight. However, if she could become the Eye of Insight and become the encyclopedia of the sorcerer world, then the price she had paid before would not be too bad. The Pendulum of Misfortune. That's the legendary item that the great wizard Kazella had when he was still alive. I'm not strong enough to find an item of this level. Alice couldn't help but roll her eyes. Holy agate. No, Dragon Tooth. No. How long can I live? I don't know. What does Lord Senazar like to eat the most? I don't know. Where do I need to find a suitable volcano world? Alovis. The two of them asked and answered. Regardless of whether it was a legendary top-grade item or some equipment that she had only heard about in ancient books, Alice would always shake her head. Grim lowered his standards again and again, but as long as it involved a high-ranked magus, Alice's answer would always be, I don't know. Just as Grim was about to give up, he casually asked the question that had been bothering him the most recently. However, Alice actually gave him an uncharacteristic answer. Alovis? What the hell was that? Why hadn't he heard of it before? However, the advantage of having the AI chip was that he could remember all the information that he could not or was too lazy to remember. Alovis. Alovis, that's right. I remember now. It seemed to be a rather well-known, dangerous place in the eastern part of a scattered forest. It was close to the Black Forest, and there were often forest monsters that came out to harass humans. As such, it was a specially marked area in the scattered forest as extremely dangerous. How could there be an underground volcano that he could not find? In the central part of the continent, all the areas with rich resources were occupied by magus clans of various sizes. The areas with underground volcanoes were publicly acknowledged as natural resources. The special geographical environment there would usually nurture rare resources that were not available on the surface. If there really was an underground volcano in Alovis, it was impossible that there were no Magus clan stationed there. With a skeptical expression, Grimm could not help but pick up a map of the Scattered Tower Forest and began to study it carefully. "Are you sure there's an underground volcano that I've been looking for?" Grimm could not help but ask. Perhaps it was because Grimm's question was too formal, but Alice's body trembled slightly, and her two large purple eyes suddenly turned completely black. She seemed to have changed into a different person, expressionlessly replying in a cold voice, "Go. Go there. There, you can find what you want." After saying this, the darkened Alice suddenly shivered and suddenly regained her senses. What's wrong with me? What did I say just now?" Grimm noticed that the blackened Alice's eyes had faded, and her large eyes had regained their liveliness. "No, it's nothing." Grimm comforted Alice with a smile. However, the other party's ghostly and ethereal voice still reverberated in his mind for a long time. "AI. Chip, did you record what happened just now?" Grimm asked in his mind. Beep. "Recording complete. What are the results of the analysis?" Beep. "There are a few possibilities. The true form of a destiny, which is 87%. Planned assimilation is 11%. Spirit possession is 1%. The rest are lower than 1%. Not displayed yet. The true form of a destiny which?" If Grimm's senses were not wrong, he did not sense any human aura from the darkened Alice. Instead, he felt as if he was facing a higher being. Did this not mean that if Alice walked further on the path of a destiny which, she would become a mysterious existence that others would not be able to understand? However, thinking about himself, Grimm felt relieved. At this point, he couldn't even be considered a real human being. Seriously speaking, he could have used an elemental life form to replace his current body of flesh and blood after completing the elemental conversion. He did not have to forcefully suppress himself and allow himself to remain in this state of being an elemental life form in flesh and blood. The current Grimm was not willing to give up on his flesh and blood. Hence, he could only use his flesh and blood as a skeleton and the fire elemental energy as nourishment to maintain his current state. For this, he had to endure a 27% reduction in battle strength. There was no other way. When the fire elemental energy gathered in his body became too dense, the first part of his body that could not withstand it would be the remaining flesh and blood. This was something that could not be helped. Shaking his head to get rid of these troublesome thoughts, Grimm said calmly, "All right, since you have lost the ability to protect yourself, I think you should not run around for now. Stay in the Magus Tower and master the only divination spell." "Who said I don't have the ability to protect myself?" Alice suddenly smiled strangely. "I still have this." As soon as she finished speaking, Alice stretched out her right hand, and a ball of strange silver light suddenly appeared in her palm and floated up and down. A void stone. Grimm could not be more familiar with this strange feeling. Seeing this scene, he could not help but say the name word by word. That's right. Grimm was so shocked by Alice's strange method of advancement that he almost forgot that there was a void stone sealed in her body. However, the void stone seemed to have suddenly gone berserk, as if it was going to devour Alice completely. But now, Grimm leaned closer and carefully looked at the silver light in Alice's hand. He could not hide the surprise on his face. Wasn't the void stone a physical body? How did it become incorporeal? Alice was like a little girl who had suddenly gotten her favorite toy. She held the silver light in her hands and squeezed it. The silver orb of light was also constantly changing into various shapes in her hand like dough. "Stop talking in riddles. Tell me what's going on." Grimm could not suppress his anxiety and lightly knocked on Alice's head. He had experienced too many strange things today. He could not be bothered to continue guessing. Instead, he used the simplest method to get the answer he wanted. This void stone had already fused with me before I advanced, and it almost devoured me. Originally, this process was already irreversible, but following my successful advancement, it was expelled by the power of the natural order. No matter how strong it is, It can't be stronger than the power of laws of the Magus world. Then why did it change its form? Grimm was still suspicious. Because it has completely fused with my consciousness. So did it fuse with you or not? Grimm was about to go crazy from this question. To be honest, it fused with me before I advanced, but it was fused with me after I advanced. So, it has now become a part of my consciousness and can be controlled by me. Then what does this mean? Of course, it means that I can use the power of space again. Before she spoke, Alice was still standing in front of Grimm with a smile, but when she finished speaking, she had already silently appeared beside Grimm. During this process, Grimm did not sense any spatial fluctuations at all. Damn. Chapter 322. If Alice could be said to be able to teleport in the past, it was only because of her spatial talent. But at that time, every time she used her innate spatial ability, it would be accompanied by strong and obvious spatial undulations. It was as if a boulder had been thrown into a pond, afraid that others would not know that she was teleporting. But just now, Alice had played it down. It was as if nothing had happened. Even though Grimm was right in front of her, he could not catch her movements in time. But what kind of person was Grimm? With the help of the AI chip, he quickly discovered the peculiarity of Alice's teleportation from the slow-motion replay. In the past, Alice's teleportation usually involved opening a spatial crack that was big enough for her to pass through. She would then hide in the spatial layer before opening another spatial crack at her destination. The entire process was done smoothly, giving people the impression that Alice had disappeared for a short period of time before suddenly reappearing. But this time, Alice had really teleported. Her body did not move, but the space around her distorted in a strange manner, squeezing the space she was in into a new location. As the space was not damaged during the entire process, the spatial undulations produced were almost undetectable. If space was compared to water, then Alice would be a fish that could move freely, but the splashes and ripples would not be able to be hidden. But now, she had simply turned into a drop of water, completely fusing with space. It was difficult to tell them apart. While Grimm was silently analyzing Alice's miraculous transformation, she was playing with a ball of silver light. The dazzling silver light was like a firefly, lingering around her small hand and changing its shape. One moment, it would stick to her smooth white arm, turning into a silver tattoo. The next moment, it would condense in her hand like a whirlwind, turning into a silver staff. The next moment, it would coil around her forehead, turning into an exquisite corolla. Armlet, bracelet, gauntlet, cloak. The silver light was like liquid metal controlled by someone's consciousness, flowing around every part of Alice's body and changing into various forms. But no matter how it changed, the silver essence remained the same. This void stone that had originally wanted to devour Alice had instead been assimilated by Alice's consciousness, and was now abnormally docile and compatible with her. The various characteristics it displayed reminded Grimm of a term, soul armament. He had a soul armament as well. It was the secret scroll of voodoo poison that always hung at his waist. This secret voodoo poison scroll had cost him a lot of resources, and it was already bound to his soul. He didn't need to rely on secret spells to control this type of soul armament like other soul armaments and equipment. As long as he willed it, the soul armament would automatically be activated. The harmony between Alice and the liquid void stone vaguely had the characteristics of a soul armament. Grimm looked up at Alice, who was playing with the silver ray excitedly. Her delicate and lovely face was filled with a happy smile. Grimm suddenly remembered something. Alice, since you've advanced, why is your body still sealed in the state of 8 years old? Are you still unable to break the seal? Humph, I don't want to grow up. Alice raised her head proudly. If I were to return to my 16-year-old body to follow a lecherous master, wouldn't I be at a disadvantage? A few black lines appeared on Grimm's forehead. However, Alice quickly changed her words with a smile. To be honest, I've only advanced to become a witch, but there's still a long way to go before I become a destiny witch. I'm afraid that the seal on my body can only be broken after I become a destiny witch. Grimm nodded. That was the most reasonable explanation. You really don't know any other spells now? Grim asked doubtfully. Yes. Ever since I advanced to the next rank, all the spells and incantations that I had previously grasped in my mind had been forgotten. Even my innate spatial abilities had disappeared. I didn't use my own power to teleport, but this void stone. What you did just now wasn't teleportation. Grim smiled and shook his head. He decided to give Alice some basic knowledge about witchcraft. How can it be called teleportation without tearing space? I think it's better to call it teleportation. Teleportation? Alice's eyes widened in confusion. In the past, her ability to control space was as easy as breathing and drinking water for an ordinary person. Therefore, she knew how, but did not know why. Even she couldn't tell the difference between teleportation and teleportation. Since he had already told her about it, Grim didn't hide it anymore. He told her about the soul equipment. As for how a magical object with the power of space could become a soul equipment, even Grim couldn't explain it. Grim had tried to ask Alice to give him some of the silver light to see if he could find anything. Unfortunately, any liquid void stone that left Alice would vanish inexplicably within a short period of time and reappear beside Alice. This was similar to the secret scroll of voodoo. After asking about some details related to divination, Grim pondered for a long time and finally believed that the Witches of Destiny might look like a weak auxiliary profession. But in reality, they were an extremely powerful profession. The rules of the world were fair. It was because some professions were too powerful that the rules of the world gave them extremely harsh conditions. If Alice wanted to obtain the power of divination, she would have to give up the rest of her abilities. If she hadn't accidentally fused with the Void Stone, she probably wouldn't have any offensive or defensive abilities at all. Powerful strength and powerful divination. If you wanted one, you would have to give up the other. This was probably a way for the world's will to prevent the emergence of powerful existences in the realm. Is there anything else? If there's nothing else, I'll go back and stabilize my spirit. Alice was obviously eager to explore her new ability. There's one more thing. Grim, stop her in time. We have some clues about the identity of the old witch who disguised herself as an illusionist. It was a witch called Angelina who sent her to kill you. Angelina? The leader of the Deceit Witches. Alice jumped up in shock and almost shouted the name. You know this person? Of course. Don't forget that I used to be a trainee witch of the Moya family. If I hadn't lost to you, I might have been brought back to the north by Grandmother Ender. Which witch faction does this Moya family belong to? Grim asked cautiously. The Moya family belongs to the Pale Witches. It's also a great witch family with thousands of years of history. Alice's tone revealed an unconcealable pride when she said this. According to the books, isn't the rise and fall of witches a very common thing? Especially when it involves the rise of a certain faction, other witch factions are not allowed to intervene. So why would the leader of the Deceit Witches take the initiative to interfere with the resurrection of the Destiny Witches? Hearing Grim's question, Alice's eyes suddenly became gloomy. After a long time, she said faintly, "The witches of today can no longer be compared to the witches of 10,000 years ago." At that time, the Witch King was still there. All the witches united around her and condensed into a powerful force. After the Witch King escaped into the endless sea of stars, the witches who stayed in the sorcerer's world became a little scattered. Of the 13 witch factions, only 7 of them were able to pass down their legacy to this day. Currently, the Deceit, Ashen, Pain, Death, Winter, Darkness, and Hypocrisy factions occupy the North. Once a new faction rises again, it will inevitably change the power structure of the North. So, then if she interfered with the affairs of the Destiny Witches, wouldn't she be afraid of the backlash of fate? Maybe there are descendants in her family who have awakened the talent of the Destiny Witches. Only then would she be able to take the risk of the backlash of fate and intervene. Alice could not help but guess. Grim was speechless for a while. Sure enough, the knowledge in books could not be trusted. The vastness and strangeness of this world had far exceeded the limits of his imagination. If he completely believed in the records and books like before, he was afraid that he would suffer a great loss next time. After Alice and Grim's secret conversation ended, She was immediately received by the grade 3 wizard Sanazar. She personally asked Alice, and she happily accepted the invitation to temporarily join the Salubo family and serve them for 8 years. Alice's identity as a Destiny Witch candidate had already been half-publicized. Although Sanazar was not interested in the mysterious inheritance methods of the Northern Witches, she had heard a little about it. With the continuous appearance of Destiny Witch candidates around the world, other than the Northern Witches who had become unusually busy, even some other forces in the Sorcerer continent had begun to intervene. Of course, they did not dare to directly challenge the Northern Witches. However, once a Destiny Witch candidate appeared in their territory, they might do anything to train and support her. In this way, once the candidate they selected won the Battle of Destiny, they could take advantage of the situation to get a piece of territory in the north, successfully extending their tentacles into the traditional territory of the Northern Witches. Therefore, at this time, the Destiny Witch candidate was not only a delicious cake, but also a hot potato. If a family was strong enough, they could naturally participate in the competition and gamble with a small amount of money. As long as they could successfully kill all the competitors before the Battle of Destiny, even if the candidate in their hands was weak, they could smoothly become the legendary Destiny Witch. Chapter 323. A small banquet was being held in Grimm's residence. There was a long table filled with delicacies, and only 20 to 30 people were present. Although there were not many people, the atmosphere was very lively. Regardless of whether it was the Magi from the Magus Tower or the Magi from the family who were stationed outside, they had all arrived, each with a few acolytes behind them. Those who could be brought along by official Magi were either prospective Magi who were prepared to be nurtured with great care or high-ranked acolytes with extraordinary talent. The ones in charge of receiving the guests were the 5 acolytes under Grimm and the Goblin Cabbie. Although they were very busy, Kadeir and the others were full of excitement, and they passionately served everyone present. Every once in a while, their gazes would involuntarily drift towards the beautiful young girl who was active among the Magi. Indeed, after advancing to become a Magus, Alice still had not broken through the seal of an 8-year-old girl, and her figure and appearance were still that of an 8-year-old. Hence, such a little fellow amongst a group of official Magi in either black or red robes seemed very out of place. However, no matter how many acolytes there were, no one dared to make fun of this. Alice's current status was completely different from theirs. Once she became an official Magus, even if she was just a newly advanced Magus, there would be an invisible but real gap between them and the acolytes. Although there were rumors that Alice had lost all her magic abilities after advancing to become a Magus, she had become a pure fortune teller. However, a Magus was still a Magus. No matter how weak Alice was, that was only in the eyes of the Magi community. To this group of acolytes, the other party was still an insurmountable mountain. Magi had their own circle, and so did acolytes. While the Magi gathered together and chatted, the acolytes also gathered in groups of 2s and 3s, enthusiastically discussing the interesting things that had happened in their family territory and the surrounding areas. Some acolytes who were good at socializing took the opportunity to walk around, trying their best to make friends with those with outstanding potential. 3 days ago, Alice was just a sorcerer's apprentice like them. Now, however, she had become a big shot that they had to treat with respect. Such an inspiring story had obviously aroused the passion of every acolyte, and the atmosphere became even more heated. Congratulations, Alice. The first person to congratulate Alice was Keel, a body refinement wizard who lived in Fedinin City. He took out a delicate magic wand with a fist-sized turquoise stone on the top. This is a spirit wand. There's a wizard-level evil spirit sealed in it. It's pretty good for defense. This is my congratulatory gift to you. Thank you. A sweet smile appeared on Alice's face, and she happily accepted the gift. Wizard Felicia, who was standing on the side, rolled her eyes at Keel and said in a sweet voice, "Keel, I didn't expect you to be so good at pleasing girls. Since that's the case, I'll give you a present. Here, Alice, this is a bottle of hydration potion. It can keep your skin moist and smooth for a long time. You just advanced, so your body needs to be nurtured. Thank you, Sister Farrell. The smile on Alice's face became even sweeter. Seeing that both of their companions had taken out their gifts, Ko-Jin and Harrison couldn't help but smile wryly at each other and could only search through their own storage space. In the end, Ko-Jin took out a pure white crystal, which was very suitable for making a crystal ball for divination. On the other hand, Harrison gave Alice a flip spell ring, which could reflect a directional spell back to the caster. It was a decent protective magic artifact. Alice was obviously a little money grubber. After suddenly receiving so many treasures and strange items, she was so happy that she couldn't even open her eyes. She hugged these items with both hands and giggled foolishly. Let's find another place to celebrate. With us here, these little fellows won't be able to let loose. Grimm smiled and led the few magi into the secret room. With the departure of these old fellows, the atmosphere in the banquet hall instantly became lively. The acolytes who had been suppressed by the aura of the magi could finally celebrate without restraint. A few acolytes of Grimm's faction and Kobe were surrounded by the crowd. Everyone was busy asking questions at the same time. Everyone asked about Wizard Alice's situation, and their words were filled with envy. Due to the needs of the planar battlefield, many magi from the family were constantly transferred to other planes. This caused the number of magi from the Salubo family to be on the Magus continent was always at a low level. Basically, every Magus from the family represented a huge amount of power and benefits. Magi might not care much about these things, but for the acolytes who stood behind the magi, it represented a huge amount of benefits that they couldn't bear to part with. If the Salubo family was a huge school of whales, then the many acolytes around it were small fish living off the leftovers of the Salubo family. If they could maintain a good relationship with any one of them, the personal benefits they could obtain would multiply as well. There weren't many magi from the Salubo family to begin with. Now that the fire demons had two, the quasi-sorcerers under the fire demons like Cordell and Merrill would undoubtedly receive more resources from the family. This kind of hidden benefit was enough to make any young quasi-sorcerer jealous. Ignoring the uproar among the acolytes, Grimm and the other magi chatted for a while and then left. Although they were all magi from the Salubo family, everyone had their own secrets. They wouldn't easily share their personal research with others. Therefore, the friendship between magi was very thin. Most of the time, it was just a way to make use of each other and invest in each other. Everyone knew how powerful the fire demon Grimm was. Whether it was the planar battlefield or the family war, his influence had far exceeded that of an old magus like Co-General Alice. On the other hand, was an enviable northern witch. She also carried the sacred halo of a destiny witch candidate. Once Alice became a destiny witch, even if she was only a grade 1 witch, she would immediately have the same power and benefits as the leaders of the grade 4 witches. According to the ancient tradition and inheritance, the other witch factions had to spit out the territories of the destiny witches that they had occupied and give the destiny witches a chance to rise again. This was a tradition, as well as a covenant. When a witch faction rose again after going through ups and downs, the other witch factions had to provide the necessary protection and support. It was by relying on this tradition of mutual help that the 13 witch factions could continue to pass down their inheritance and firmly control the northern territory of the Sorcerer Continent. Therefore, an appropriate investment in a witch candidate was definitely a worthwhile thing to do. However, if Alice wanted to get the full support of the Salubo family, she would probably have to go through more negotiations and more exchanges of interests. After all, according to the information obtained by Sanazar, there were many elite descendants of other witch factions among the candidates for the Destiny witch selection this time. The reason why Angelina, the leader of the Deception Witches, sent people to kill Alice was because her granddaughter had also accidentally awakened the Destiny witch bloodline. In order to ensure that her direct bloodline could smoothly become a Destiny witch, she had sent a large number of people to kill the awakened ones who had exposed their identities. In the name of helping her blood relatives, Angelina could also avoid the other witches' accusations of interfering in the selection of the Destiny Witches. That was why her actions were so unscrupulous, to the point that it was unbearable. With her there, the rest of the sorcerer families and organizations would become hesitant when choosing who to support. After all, Angelina herself was a rank 4 witch, and she had hundreds of official witches under her command. No one dared to ignore such a heavy force. To be honest, if it weren't for Grimm's deep involvement in the War of Destiny, with the Solubo family's strength, they would not be willing to make any investment in Alice, a person who was bound to die. This could be seen from today's celebration banquet. Several wizards sent Alice their blessings and gifts on behalf of themselves, but Senazar, who represented the Solubo family, did not show up at all. The service contract signed between the Solubo family and Alice was only for a short 8 years, just before the start of the War of Destiny. This was enough to show the Solubo family's attitude. They were not optimistic about Alice's fate. To put it bluntly, if it were not for Grimm's face and Alice's successful advancement to a wizard, the Solubo family would have probably handed over Alice's apprentice in exchange for some benefits from the deceitful witch's faction. Therefore, when Alice sent off all the guests with a smile and bid farewell to Grimm, she returned to her residence alone. The smile on her face gradually disappeared and was replaced by a dignified and distressed look. Although she had the body and appearance of a little girl, she had the sharp mind of a 16-year-old girl. The Solubo family's stance was so obvious. How could she not understand? Should I leave without saying goodbye and find a secluded place to hide? Or should I stay under Grimm's wings and become his vassal? All these questions put her in a dilemma. Although she was an apprentice witch of the Moya family, Alice knew very well that she was an apprentice witch. This was not enough for the leader of the Ashen Witches to stand up for him and fight Angelina head-on. The witches had always been united. Sometimes, in order to maintain this unity, it was inevitable that some internal sacrifices would be made. One was the direct descendant of the leader of the deceitful witches, while the other was an ordinary member of the Ashen Witches. If these two identities collided, if the Witch Council were to make a decision, the decision would definitely not be beneficial to Alice. That was why Alice was more determined than ever to return to the Moya family and stay by Grimm's side. At least, Grimm was sincerely protecting her and fighting for every chance for her to win. Chapter 3:24. It was a dark green sea of trees. Standing at the top of the cliff, one could see a magnificent city and the towering wizard tower in the distance. Ferdinand was an inconspicuous human city. If it weren't for the Solubo family's headquarters, Nina wouldn't have known the name, let alone traveled thousands of miles to get here. Behind her, an old witch with a stooped body, wearing a gray robe and a gray pointed hat, was laughing coldly with a voice as cold as an owl's. Nina, what are you up to by taking the initiative to ask him out? Do you want to betray the interests of the Northern Witches? You better be careful. If I get hold of any evidence, the Witch Council won't let you off easily. Nina was a tall, slender, and well-proportioned woman in white, clothes-fitting armor. Her face might not be handsome enough, but her crystal-clear azure eyes were enough to make her step into the ranks of the top beauties. She stood proudly on a protruding boulder at the top of the cliff. Not far from her lay a huge thunder rock covered with green scales. It could be seen that she had just come from a long and arduous journey. The long journey had exhausted the thunder rock, and it no longer had the wild and tyrannical attitude of a grade 2 magical beast. After surveying Fedinan's city in the distance, the witch Nina, who also possessed the strength of a grade 2 witch, turned around and quietly admired the beautiful scenery of the undulating forest. However, she was unwilling to let her gaze land on the poisonous woman's ugly old face. You'll know what I want to do in a moment. Ender, don't forget that before you find evidence against me, you still have to obey the Witch Council's decision. Leader Angelina is willing to exchange Frozen City and the surrounding land for one of your apprentice witches. This deal has already been approved by your leader. Do you dare to go against the Witch Council? Knowing that what the other party said was the truth, Ender's wrinkled old face became more and more unsightly. However, she still argued, You're just using your identity as the convener of this Centennial Council to force the resolution through. Only 3 families participated in the voting. The rest of the families either refused to participate or their leaders weren't present. That's why you were able to rope in those hypocritical witches and make such a disgusting decision. So you rushed over to stop me? Nina turned around. Her blue eyes were so sharp that no one could look her in the eye. You gave a novice witch to those stinky men as a slave, and you still expect her to become a destiny witch, and then insult all the northern witches? After all, Poison Witch Ender was only a Tier 1 sorcerer. Under the terrifying mental pressure of Witch Nina, she finally lowered her head helplessly, and a look of humiliation and misery appeared on her face. After all, Alice was the little fellow she had brought up. Seeing her walking into death today, Ender's heart was about to explode with rage. He knew that the other party was playing tricks, and he knew that this would cause an indescribable blow to the morale of the Pale Witches. But when the other party took out the resolution personally approved by the Witch Council, Ender, as Alice's great-grandmother, was powerless to stop it. This kind of grief and indignation was difficult for outsiders to understand. However, it was impossible for her to openly stop Nina's action because of her strength. Secondly, it was tantamount to openly making an enemy out of all the witches in the northern region. And the latter was something that Ender, as a northern witch, was not willing to do. Ender, the poison witch, shook her head painfully. Don't worry, I won't stop you from carrying out the orders of the Witch Council. But I want to ask you to give Alice a quick death and stop torturing her. Poison Woman, who had always been stubborn and bad-tempered, would also ask for help. Nina, who had always been decisive in killing, could not help but hesitate a little, but then she nodded. I will. She hasn't done anything to betray the northern witches. As long as she washes away the stain of being a slave with her blood, her soul can still be accepted by the witches. Ender was silent. The northern witches dominated the north, and had always pursued the supremacy of women. Therefore, most witches' attitude towards men was that they could only use them and not get close to them. Although there were many wizards in the witch territory, they were all suppressed by the powerful and domineering witch leaders. Therefore, there was a strange society where witches were the masters of the house. It was under the influence of this abnormal mentality that the witches from a northern region were arrogant and domineering, but they were also very good at fighting. More importantly, they were also extremely united. Therefore, although other wizard organizations or forces did not like them, they did not dare to provoke this group of female tyrants who were like fierce tigers. Just as the two witches gradually fell into silence, a strong wind suddenly blew in the distant sky. With a flash of a green figure, Senazar, the Tier 3 wizard, descended from the sky and slowly stood in the void in front of the two. At the same time, flames burst from the bottom of the cliff under their feet, and a tall male figure emerged. He's finally here. The two witches greeted him with completely different moods. Northern Nina greets Lord Senazar on behalf of the Witch Council. Northern Ender greets Lord Senazar. Through the green mist that lingered around his body, Senazar sneered. You don't have to be so polite, and you don't have to use your Witch Council to pressure me. This kind of trick won't work in our idle tower forest. Tell me, why did you send someone to invite me out? Although the other party's tone was not friendly, in the face of a powerful Tier 3 wizard, even Nina, who was used to being arrogant, did not dare to be too presumptuous. She glanced at the silent young wizard standing at the bottom of the cliff and finally said, Respected Lord Senazar, I'm here on the orders of the Witch Council to take away the Moya family's apprentice witch, Alice. This is the Council's resolution. After saying this, Nina took out a sheepskin scroll from her white armor and gently presented it to the green mist. The green mist shook, and a large hand with sharp claws covered with green scales suddenly reached out and grabbed the scroll, then retracted. After a moment, the scroll slowly flew out and fell into Nina's hands. I've already read it. Alice is indeed in our family. What's wrong? Do you want to take her away by force? Senazar's hoarse voice came out of the green mist with a hint of mockery. This was the truth. This resolution might have absolute binding force on the witches, but this was the scattered tower forest, not the territory of the northern witches. The ruling of the witch chiefs had no control over the internal affairs of the Cerubo family. My lord, as long as you're willing to let go. Leader Angelina has said that she's willing to provide you with 200,000 magic crystals or resources of the same value. As long as you say the word, these things will be sent to your wizard tower within 10 days. Also, one of our witches seems to have offended you and was taken away by you. As long as you can release her, our leader is willing to pay another 100,000. Suddenly, an ear-piercing scream came from the green mist. It sounded like crying and laughing at the same time, and immediately after, a round object was thrown out. In that case, let's complete the second condition first. As for the first condition, that Alice doesn't belong to me. She belongs to Grimm. You can talk to him. Nina grabbed the object thrown out by Sanazar and held it in front of her eyes. Only then did she realize that it was a witch's bloody head. Looking at the white bones under the neck, it seemed that the head had been twisted off while it was still alive. The anger in Nina's heart surged. Then, she sensed a faint soul wave from the human head. Only then did she relax her brows and try to suppress her anger. I've returned the head to you. For the sake of the northern witches, I didn't destroy her soul. Take it back and find her a body. Maybe she can be saved. Why do you want it? If not, I'll take it back and feed it to the dogs. Sanazar's tone was still the same as her personality, cold and hard. Yes, Nina's cold words were practically squeezed out from the gaps of her teeth. We owe you a favor. We'll definitely send 100,000 magic crystals within 10 days. However, about that Alice. Asterisk bang. Asterisk with the sound of an explosion. The tall and handsome young wizard appeared on top of the cliff. He smiled and nodded at Poison Woman Ender, then looked up at Nina. Lady Sanazar has already made it very clear. You can only talk to me about anything related to Alice. Nina looked at him with disgust. Although she was confident that she was tall enough, she was still half a head shorter in front of him. This made it impossible for her to put on a condescending and oppressive aura in front of him. Moreover, under her powerful spiritual pressure, the young wizard with only the strength of a grade 1 wizard was able to withstand it without batting an eyelid. This made her even more annoyed. If it wasn't for that troublesome grade 3 stinky poisonous dragon, Nina swore that she would definitely beat him up so that he would never dare to be so arrogant in front of her again. However, the situation was stronger than her, so she could only endure it secretly. She even wanted to. No, alright, to be honest, he wasn't stinky at all. He even had a liveliness that other wizards didn't have. This was probably because he was a newly advanced wizard. He didn't have the lethargic aura that other wizards had. Instead, he had a kind of youthful vigor and a refined temperament formed from the accumulation of profound knowledge. Moreover, this figure, this face, this temperament, no matter how one looked at him, why did he give off a feeling of calmness and wisdom? It was a pity that she couldn't find a wizard with such a temperament in the Northern Territory. Otherwise, if she caught him as a lover, wouldn't it be? Chapter 325. For no reason at all, several black lines appeared on everyone's forehead at the same time. As the person in question, Grimm's expression became even more awkward. With an angry snort, a dazzling red light burst forth from his body. Fire elements quickly gathered in the air, forming a flaming armor on his burly body. The air around Grimm suddenly became hot and hazy. According to common sense, Grimm, a grade 1 magus, daring to do this in front of a grade 2 witch, Nina, was already a slight offense. If Sanazar was not present, even if Nina punished him, the Cerubo family would not be able to pursue the matter. But now that Lady Sanazar was here, Grimm had to act tough. But Nina did not seem to notice Grimm's offense. Instead, she raised her eyebrows and smiled, a hint of admiration in her eyes. Among the 3 major magus organizations, the Northern Witches were a group of women, but they were famous for their fighting prowess. The reason why the Northern Witches were able to firmly occupy the Sorcerer Continent, where magical beasts were powerful, was because of their fierce fighting style. As for the leaders, deputy leaders and chiefs of the various witch factions, they were all purely violent and ferocious. Perhaps it was due to her personality, but when Nina saw Grimm, a wizard with a tough style, she suddenly had a good impression of him. "Lady Nina, since you're here, why don't we get straight to the point? Alice is one of my people. If you come here and threaten to kill her, you're challenging the dignity of the sorcerers in the scattered Talon region." Grimm warned sternly. Nina was indeed a powerful wizard who had been through many battles. She was only distracted for a moment, but she had already regained her usual decisiveness and coldness. "We can make it up to you." Nina smiled calmly. "You're the wizard who subdued Alice, right? Since you just advanced, you must be lacking in various resources. As long as you ask for it, we, the Deceit Witches, will not bargain with you. This will save you 100 years of time, and you won't have to run around and risk your life anymore." "Why not?" After listening to Nina's words, before Grimm could react, Ender, the poison witch who had been standing next to him, suddenly changed her expression. With an uneasy mood, Ender's sinister eyes, hidden under the wide brim of his hat, suddenly stared at Grimm. As someone with experience, she knew very well how tempting Nina's promise was to a newly advanced magus. In the Sorcerer Continent, the development of sorcerers was basically like this. After advancing to the next rank, one would usually need to find a place to settle down and adapt to the lifestyle and social circle of a sorcerer. More importantly, he had to adjust his mentality from the level of an acolyte to that of a wizard. At this stage, most magi's spiritual force fluctuated around 1 point, and the time span was about 10 years. Once one's strength had stabilized, every magus would discover that just by relying on daily meditation, their spiritual force would increase at a tortoise-like rate. It was simply mind-blowing. Even if he meditated day after day, it was still very difficult to clearly feel the growth of his mental strength. Some busybody magi had once estimated that even if a newly advanced magus meditated day and night, it would take at least 87 years to raise his spiritual force from 1 point to 5 points and become a veteran magus, and to raise his spiritual force to 10 points and become an elite magus. It would take at least 273 years. And this number of years did not include the time spent by each magus on witchcraft experiments and searching for resources and knowledge outside. Therefore, it was simply impossible to reach the limit of a grade 1 magus's spiritual force by relying on meditation alone. Therefore, for those who were interested in becoming a grade 2 magus, it was simply impossible to become a grade 2 magus by staying in the Sorcerer Tower and relying only on witchcraft experiments and meditation every day. The only thing that could change this situation was the power of knowledge and the assistance of resources. Therefore, once a newly advanced magus stabilized his spiritual force and found that his strength had stagnated, he could not help but wander the Sorcerer Continent and search for knowledge and resources everywhere. Nearly 20% of the newly advanced magi in the Sorcerer Continent died in various expeditions to search for resources. At this time, if there was a large amount of resources, it would definitely save a newly advanced magus the hard work of running around and also reduce many unnecessary risks, allowing them to grow quickly and safely. Take her, the toxic witch Ender, for example. Whether it was in the North or the Central Continent, she had already made a name for herself. However, up until now, with more than half of her life gone, her spiritual force had barely crossed the threshold of 10 points, and she had entered the ranks of elite magi. With this speed, there was absolutely no chance for her to reach the threshold of a grade 2 magus, and she would lose the chance to extend her life. The reason for all this was that she had been forced to wander around due to the lack of resources in the first half of her life. Therefore, when she suddenly heard Nina's temptation, Poison Witch Ender could not help but worry that Grimm would suddenly change his mind. After all, the temptation was too great. If it had been her in the past, she might not have been able to resist it. Grimm smiled faintly. At this moment, his eyes flashed with the light of wisdom. The cold lines on his face and the trace of a devilish smile on his lips gave off an unfathomable feeling. Grim almost wanted to laugh maniacally in his heart. Spiritual force increasing too slowly? Ha! His current problem was the opposite. What he needed to worry about was not being too slow, but too fast. It had only been 2 or 3 years since he had become an official magus, and his spiritual force had increased from less than 1 point to the current 4 points. Of course, most of this was due to the feedback from the Knight's plane, but his own careful management and accumulation were also indispensable. At this time, what he needed more was to stabilize and solidify his spiritual force that had suddenly skyrocketed. As for resources and knowledge, he was not lacking in them. The spoils of war he had obtained from many battles were enough for him to live comfortably for the first 100 years of his life. So the other party's conditions, Lady Nina, I'm very sorry, but I have to reject your kindness. Grim rejected her straightforwardly. Nina's expression changed, and the smile on her face disappeared completely. She asked coldly, "Are you sure you want to reject the goodwill of a powerful witch family? You have to know that you are rejecting resources and magic crystals worth 200,000 magic crystals, as well as the goodwill of the deceiving witches." Of course I know what I'm rejecting. Grim's face was suddenly filled with excitement. But no matter how many resources you give me, I won't hand Alice over. Why? Using 200,000 magic crystals to buy a little apprentice, which you... Lady Nina, I'm very sorry, but you are mistaken. Alice is not an apprentice witch. She just became a witch yesterday. Ah, God. Not only was Nina shocked, even Ender, who had been listening by the side, was dumbfounded. How is this possible? She had raised Alice, and she had just become a quasi-witch not long ago. How could she become a witch so quickly? Was he deliberately deceiving Nina? Not only Ender, but even the witch Nina also looked at the green mist not far away. From within the green mist, Sarnazar's ear-piercing hiss rang out once more. I can confirm this. That little girl has successfully advanced yesterday. That's why our Salubo family doesn't have an apprentice witch like Alice. But we do have a real witch, Alice. Nina looked at the green mist doubtfully, and then at Ender. Although she was skeptical, she did not dare to question the veracity of a Tier 3 witch's words. Although Alice's advancement was somewhat unexpected, Nina only thought that the information she had collected was wrong. She was not as shocked as Ender. No, the more it was like this, the more she could not let Alice stay. After thinking this through, Nina's azure eyes flashed with a cold glint. 300,000. If you're willing to give up Alice, Lady Nina, are you sure that a Fate Witch candidate who has advanced to become a witch is only worth 300,000? Grim's words were filled with ridicule. Nina's mouth could not help but twitch. 400,000. Grim did not reply, but the disdain in his eyes was glaring. 50. Nina was already gnashing her teeth. The trace of admiration that had sprouted from the bottom of her heart had now disappeared. She glared at Grim with a ferocious gaze, like a pair of glowing green eyes in a dark forest. 500,000 magic crystals was more than enough to hire a rank 2 magus to be his bodyguard for 2 years. Sarnazar's sinister laughter rang out from within the green mist. It seemed that even she was not completely indifferent to this price. Poison centipede Ender, who was waiting by the side, opened his mouth wider and wider. Looking at the changing scenes in the hall, she already felt that her brain couldn't keep up with her eyes. Oh my God, 500,000 magic crystals. With her reputation as a poison woman, she had accepted the Moya family's commission to stay in the scattered tower forest area, and the family's annual tribute was only 3,000 magic crystals. Yet, Nina was actually willing to exchange 500,000 magic crystals for a new witch. 500,000 magic crystals was probably equivalent to the total income of the Moya family in the scattered tower forest area for half a year. While Ender's sluggish brain was still struggling with the disparity between 500,000 and 3,000, Grim's cold and deep voice rang in her ears. I still refuse. Why? Nina's eyes were red. She took a step forward and stared fiercely at Grim, the tip of her nose almost touching the tip of her nose. Why? Poison centipede Ender muttered to himself. To be honest, at this moment, Even she wanted to know why. Because I've fallen in love with Alice. Chapter 326. At first, there was dead silence, but then Nina laughed so hard that she rocked back and forth. What? What did you say? You've fallen in love with Alice. Ha! This is so funny. The green mist did not move at all. Poison centipede Ender's wrinkled and ugly face was completely lifeless. Even his cloudy eyes were frozen in place, not moving at all. Grimm's face was calm and solemn, without any expression on it. Nina, who was halfway through laughing, rubbed her waist and finally stood up straight. She slowly scanned her surroundings and finally fixed her gaze on Grimm. Is what you said true? You're not joking. Nina still could not believe it. Grimm nodded expressionlessly. Everything did not seem to be fake. Nina rubbed her forehead and rubbed her eyes. She gritted her teeth for a long time, but found that she could not say anything harsh. Were there still magicians who would risk their lives for love in this day and age? Goliath a big head. Such people could only be found in the novels of mortals. But in reality, originally, Nina could confidently expose Grimm's lies, but for some reason, there was a voice in the depths of her heart that whispered, "It's not impossible." This made her even more irritated and furious. An incomparably sharp, murderous aura of the red mantis fruit spread out from the green mist. The existence of the grade 3 Sinazar was like a bucket of ice water that could freeze one's bones, instantly extinguishing all the delusions in Nina's heart. Good, very good. Nina did not know what to say at that moment. She struggled to climb onto the thunder rock beside her and said ruthlessly, "You can protect your love. I'll come back for you." After saying that, the grade 2 thunder rock, which had the powerful power of lightning, flapped its wings and soared into the sky, almost disappearing into the horizon in the blink of an eye. Seeing that Nina had left, poison centipede Ender, who had a dull expression on his face, wanted to talk to Grimm, but he immediately felt a slight pressure coming from the depths of the green mist. Endo could only silently step onto his magic broom, wanting to say something before leaving. He only said, "Alice is still young," before flying away. A gentle breeze blew, and the sea of trees rustled. There were only 2 people left in the crowded hall. Grimm stood on the cliff with an awkward expression, waiting for the last round of questioning. Why? The inevitable question finally came. "Sir, between 500,000 magic crystals and the friendship of the Destiny Witches, what would you choose?" Grimm did not dare to speak carelessly in front of Lady Sinazar, who had always been protecting him. In order to shut the Northern Witches' mouths, Grimm had no choice but to make a big lie. Magi were all realistic people. If there wasn't a good reason, no one would believe you. Since the Northern Witches believed that Grimm had another motive for protecting Alice, if he could not come up with a good enough reason, the witches would always doubt his motives. Although the excuse of love was old-fashioned and enough to make some people laugh their heads off, it was just right for the Northern Witches. Didn't you suspect that I had ulterior motives? So now I'm plotting something. I'm plotting Alice. Although such a reason was absurd, it was enough to stop the witches from bargaining. However, this excuse could not be used to deal with Sinazar. If Grimm dared to say that he loved Alice, that was why he wanted to protect her. He was sure that the hot-tempered Sinazar would slap him to death right here and now. For the sake of an illusory love story, the Cerubo family had to take on the deceit witches. This kind of inexplicable hatred would definitely annoy any family member. Therefore, when facing Sinazar, Grimm could only openly talk about benefits. A disdainful sneer came from the green mist. "Can you guarantee that Alice can survive the Battle of Destiny? Why did I hear that she sacrificed all of her abilities in order to successfully advance? Can you guarantee that such a useless thing can survive?" This was also the result of Grimm's negotiation with Alice. The existence of the mutated Void Stone must not be leaked. At least, before Alice became a Destiny Witch, this trump card must not be leaked. "Yes, I promise." Grimm's answer was resolute. "Why?" "Because of the steel puppet I'm making for her. Also, I can let her use my Inferno Tyrant." Ugh, Sinazar had seen Grimm's Inferno Tyrant before. With regards to its strength, Sinazer acknowledged that it would have no problem taking on an elite magus on its own. With Grimm's puppet craftsmanship, if he could make a steel puppet for Alice, even an idiot would dare to try his luck in the battle of fate. Sinazer was silent. After a long time, the voice came from the green mist again. If it's successful, I want the permanent management rights of the Destiny Witches territory. The Cerubo family can bear all the resources you need to make the steel puppet. As long as Alice is still in the Cerubo family, I can guarantee her safety. It's settled then. Without waiting for Grimm's reply, the green mist floated and disappeared in an instant. When Grimm returned to his residence, he was welcomed by Alice and Cabby. The two of them held a deck of tarot cards in their hands and seemed to be playing cards for fun. However, Cabby's green face was covered with paper of all sizes, while Alice's face was clean. She was even holding a red apple and chewing on it. In front of her, a large pile of oddly shaped things almost covered her body. Cabby, on the other hand, looked like he was suffering from constipation. "You're back." Alice jumped down from the wooden chair beside the table excitedly and ran to Grimm. She raised her head and asked, "How did it go?" While asking, Alice's big eyes were still blinking at the side. "Don't you know divination? Can't you see our results?" Grimm asked curiously. Lady Sinazer was there, and the force field was too strong. "I can't see what they're doing with my ability." Alice's little face wrinkled bitterly. "Aren't you afraid that I'll sell you?" Grimm asked impatiently. Although I can't see the specific information, I still have some vague feedback. I just need to know that it's good news for me." Alice immediately became smug again. "I'll sell you." Grimm could not help but groan. "How much? How many magic crystals did they pay for me? Tell me quickly." Alice suddenly became excited. Behind her, Cabby stretched out his trembling hands and secretly reached for the pile of bets. "What do you think?" Alice tilted her head and thought for a moment. She stretched out 3 trembling fingers, but halfway through, she suddenly extended 5 fingers. 50,000. Grimm smiled and shook his head. "Is it too high or too low?" Alice clasped her palms together, looking nervous. "It's too low." Alice was delighted when she heard that. She lowered her head and thought for a moment, then gritted her teeth and said fiercely, 100,000. It can't be any higher. I know those northern witches. They're good at fighting, but when it comes to money, they don't have the brains." Her tone was full of disdain. Grimm still shook his head and added, "I've already told Witch Nina that you've become a witch." "It's Nina the witch?" "She's one of the stronger deceit witches." Alice could not help but mumble. "So it's 200,000? Still shaking his head. Alice's breathing became heavier. She was also from the northern lands, and she knew very well what 200,000 magic crystals meant to a witch family. It was more than enough to hire a grade 2 witch as a bodyguard, let alone an ordinary witch. 300,000. Alice almost squeezed the number out of her teeth. Cabby, who was behind her, stopped stealing and turned to look at Alice, who was only a meter tall. His eyes were filled with sparkling magic crystals. If 300,000 magic crystals were piled up here, it would probably be enough to drown him. Is this Alice worth that much? Seeing that Grimm was still shaking his head, Alice felt that her heart was about to stop beating. For 100,000, Alice screamed at the top of her lungs. At this moment, even she wanted to sell herself. That was 400,000 magic crystals. However, in the next moment, Grimm still shook his head and looked at her with a sorrowful expression. He spat out a shocking number. 500,000, and I rejected it. Alice's breath caught in her throat. The half-eaten apple in her hand fell to the ground and slowly rolled away. Behind her, Cabby's mouth was wide open. He pointed at Alice's back, his face full of shock and disbelief. "Why didn't you sell me? Why didn't you sell me? Why?" Alice's eyes were filled with confusion and bewilderment. The gnome Cabby nodded vigorously, evidently having the same doubts. Grimm laughed bitterly. Looking at Alice's serious expression, he finally said, "Because I think you're worth more." With that, Grimm returned to his bedroom and locked the door. It was such a cold and heartless sentence, but for some reason, Alice felt her nose turn sour, and tears flowed down uncontrollably. While sobbing incessantly, Alice turned around and looked at her only family, KB. "My dear KB, will you sell me for 500,000 magic crystals?" Cabby's body stiffened. He nodded frantically and then shook his head vigorously. He was so flustered that he didn't know what to say. Seeing Alice stretch out her hand, Cabby immediately hugged his head and didn't dare to move. Alice stretched out her small hand and caressed Cabby's head, who was as tall as her. Then, she left with a heavy heart. What's wrong with everyone today? Why are they so weird? Chapter 327. Northern part of the Scattered Towers, Ibis City. This was the only public city closest to the Northern Territory in the Scattered Towers. All the merchants heading to the Northern Territory had to depart from here, which was why it was the place with the most witches in the central part of the continent. As the Northern Territory was located at the northern border of the continent and was separated from the central part of the continent by the boundless Black Forest, it was difficult for both sides to maintain close communication and trade. Most of the connections between the Scattered Towers and the Silver Alliance were made by floating battleships, while the connections between the Scattered Towers and the Northern Territory were made by caravans that traveled through the Black Forest. In order to better protect the caravans in the Black Forest from jungle creatures, magical beasts, defilers, and mutated creatures, a large number of wizards and apprentices gathered in Ibis City. On one hand, they provided protection for the caravans and earned magic crystals, and on the other hand, they took the opportunity to hone their combat abilities. Both sides took what they needed, which made the trade route in the Black Forest the most lively place. Ibis City. In a secret room where the Deception Witches were staying, a large cloud of black smoke emerged from an underground spell formation, and a slender figure wrapped in a palace dress was outlined with simple lines. The eyes of the figure hidden in the black smoke were so sharp that no one dared to look at them directly. "Nina, the latest batch of goods has been shipped, and it's estimated to arrive in 43 days. Send someone to receive them in time. This batch of goods includes rare resources such as dream dew flowers, lich flowers, taro fruits, and 50 kilograms of krypton gold ingots, as well as a large number of frost potions. It's estimated to be around 2.8 million magic crystals, so we can't lose it." "Understood, Lord Patriarch. Also, how's the task I gave you?" Nina, who was always swift and decisive, could not help but hesitate when it came to the task. "What's wrong? Did something happen? Was Friend killed?" The voice of the woman in the black smoke suddenly turned sharp. "No, Chief. Friend didn't die. Although her body was destroyed, her head and soul are still intact. She's currently recovering in the encampment." "Then what's the problem? I've already proposed to the other party to pay 500,000 magic crystals to redeem Alice from the Moya tribe." Nina said hesitantly. 500,000? Are you crazy? Our family's annual income of magic crystals is only 3.7 million, and you actually use 500,000 to buy a little apprentice witch. You. The woman in the black smoke couldn't help but take a step forward, her angry voice rising by 3 octaves. He refused. The woman's voice came to an abrupt stop. After a long time, she coldly said, "What's going on? Who is the he you mentioned just now?" Nina raised her eyebrows and revealed a distressed look. She quickly summarized what had happened 7 days ago. The woman in the black smoke listened carefully and couldn't help but ask. "He said that the Moya girl broke through. Is it true?" "It has been confirmed. I even went so far as to sneak into Feldine City and get first-hand information from the apprentices there. The Moya girl had sacrificed all of her abilities and talents to become a witch. It is said that the innate spell he obtained is divination." At this point, Nina couldn't help but ask, "Chief, how's the progress on Shefu's side?" The woman in the black smoke was silent for a moment and finally said, "Shefu's talent in ice and snow is amazing. She has already reached the peak of a quasi-wizard. With another half a year of preparation and accumulation, it won't be a problem for her to break through." Both sides became silent at the same time. Everyone knew that a domestic flower was not as strong as a wildflower. That Moya girl had broken through half a year earlier than Shefu, who lacked talent, resources, and knowledge. No matter what, she was a big problem. Although both of them knew what was going on, they didn't want to say it out loud, so there was an awkward silence. What's the reason that the Cerubo family doesn't want to hand over Alice? Do they want to interfere with the internal affairs of the Northern Witches as outsiders? After a long time, the woman in the black smoke spoke again. It doesn't seem like the Cerubo family is in charge of this matter, but a fire wizard who just broke through. According to the information I received, the Moya girl only signed a master-servant contract with this wizard. The reason that the wizard gave is... At this point, Nina couldn't help but hesitate. What is it? The woman in the black smoke glared at Nina with dissatisfaction. Although both sides were tens of thousands of miles apart and were connected through a spell formation, Nina could still feel the silent, heavy pressure. He said he fell in love with Alice. Nina braced herself and said. There was another long silence. Then, the woman's charming laughter came from the black smoke. Love? Ha! Love? Ha! The laughter was crisp and melodious, but it suddenly turned cold at the end. Nina, I think you're getting more and more brainless. How can you believe such a ridiculous excuse? But I have to believe the truth. Chief, I've already done my investigation. That wizard has no relatives, no one to rely on, and no one to support him. His advancement seemed to be an accident as well. He was only able to join the Cerubo family after he became a wizard. The woman in the black smoke didn't say anything and listened quietly. He doesn't have a close relationship with the Cerubo family, and the Moya girl doesn't usually receive any special treatment from the Cerubo family. That's why I'm sure that the one who wants to protect Alice isn't Sinazar, who's in charge of the Cerubo family. Instead, it might be the wizard's idea. What right does he have to protect Alice? Did you just say that he's also a newly advanced magus? Yes. He's called Grim, a fire element wizard. According to the information, he just became a wizard less than 2 years ago. A young wizard who just became a wizard less than 2 years ago rejected your offer of 500,000 magic crystals. Yes. Is he crazy or stupid? Does he really think he can train Alice to the point where she can fight against Shefu? Although Shefu started half a year later than her, but at this point, the woman in the black smoke couldn't help but frown in distress. The Moya girl sacrificed all her power in exchange for divination. It didn't seem wise, but it gave the woman in the black smoke a bad idea. It seemed like the core witches of the Destiny Witches were divination spells. If the opponent gave up on all attack and defense, she would definitely become the weakest one in the Battle of Destiny. How could she be so confident that she could survive the cruelest battle of life and death with divination spells alone? If she died in the first round, what was the point of strengthening the Destiny Witch's talents? If she could survive the Battle of Destiny, she might really have a chance to become the strongest Destiny Witch in the past few thousand years. But what would she rely on to survive? In the Battle of Destiny, the Destiny Witch candidates would be sent into the Tower of Destiny. No external objects or outsiders would be able to help them. In this situation, they would have to fight each other and guard against the remaining witchcraft traps and puppet wizard beasts in the Tower of Destiny. How could a little girl with no fighting power survive? Any random puppet beast would probably be able to tear her into pieces. She didn't even have any offensive spells. If she really met an enemy, how could she win? Endure the enemy's violent attacks, rush to the enemy's side, and stab them to death with a knife? Of course, if the Cerubo family was willing to give her some magic scrolls, potions, and wands, she could still fight to a certain extent. With this method, it wouldn't be a problem to bully some apprentice-level opponents. But if she had to face other sorcerer-level opponents, how much fighting power could she use? Would the Cerubo family really be willing to bet on her for such an action that was practically courting death? The more she thought about it, the more difficult it was to understand. After thinking about it, the woman in the black smoke couldn't find a real reason why the other party rejected her suggestion to protect Alice. Could it really be because of love? Chief, what do you want Chef to do? Nina couldn't help but ask. Learn from that, Alice, or, with Chef's personality and her achievements in Ice and Snow, it's impossible for her to give up completely. And the process of the Battle of Destiny has always been bloody and cruel. If Chef gives up her fighting power, I'm afraid she won't be able to last until the end. Can't we get rid of all the opponents that can threaten her? We can't do it. The woman in the black smoke smiled bitterly. Destiny is the most difficult thing to grasp and control. All we can do is to get rid of those who pose the greatest threat. It's easier said than done to get rid of all the opponents. And the other witches are already dissatisfied with our actions and have been continuously pressuring me recently. If we can't do it in the near future, it'll be even more impossible in the future. Nina was silent. They were openly interfering with the rise of the Witches of Destiny. Seriously speaking, they had already violated the commandments left behind by the Witch King. If they did it cleanly, and the other witches could not get any evidence, then the other witch leaders could do nothing about it. But if those stubborn old fellows understood and took the initiative to protect the remaining candidates, it would be very difficult for the deceitful witches to do anything. Then what should I do? Nina asked. Give up on that, Alice, for now. You need to go to the Moas area in the western part of the Scattertalon. There seems to be a witch candidate who has just advanced. Get rid of her first. I've already sent the specific information over, so hurry up and do it. Yes. Nina's heart trembled, and she bowed in response. It seemed that the power of destiny had also sensed the urgency of the situation, and so many troublesome fellows had appeared at once. Since you dare to block our way, then we'll kill you until you listen to us. Chapter 328. Ferd South City, Magus Tower. Inside Grimm's residence, a spacious puppet hall had been specially built for him. At this moment, the hall was in a mess. Wooden boxes of various sizes were piled up in the corners of the hall. Some of the boxes on the outside had already been opened, revealing neatly stacked metal ingots. The metal ingots had been cast into rectangles, and under the soft and bright light of the hall, they flashed with a cold luster. These were all magic iron alloys, each mixed with an appropriate amount of special ores. Thus, they had strange effects that ordinary metals did not have. In the corner of the hall, a simplified version of a magic furnace stood there. 3 stone pillar-like legs of the furnace were located in 3 different mysterious spell formations. The violent and ferocious elemental currents in the Magus Tower were constantly flowing into the furnace through these legs, turning into scorching elemental flames that wreaked havoc in the furnace. 2 dwarf blacksmiths with bulging muscles and glossy skin were standing on wooden stools next to the furnace. They were wielding iron hammers the size of human heads, using all their strength to hammer a piece of magic iron alloy that had already been heated to a crimson red. The huge metal roar was deafening. 3 acolytes were gathered around the magic furnace, constantly adjusting the spell formation under the legs of the furnace to control the elemental flames within the furnace to maintain a constant temperature of 5,380 degrees. This temperature was enough to melt magic iron ingots. Apart from the 3 acolytes controlling the magic furnace, there were more than 10 other acolytes who were also busy. Some of the acolytes were directing 3 strong giants that were as tall as 3 meters to continuously feed magic iron ingots into the furnace. Every time one of the walls of the magic furnace was opened, a terrifyingly high-temperature flame would gush out under the immense pressure. The acolytes were fine, as they all had a layer of bright red light on their bodies that could effectively insulate them from the high-temperature flames. However, the giants did not have this ability. They could only endure the sizzling sounds of their skin and flesh being burned as they did their best to stuff the magic iron ingots into the furnace. After the magic iron ingots were softened by the elemental flames, they still had to take them out and hand them to 2 dwarf blacksmiths, who would then use all their strength to hammer the iron ingots into the desired shape. At the other end of the hall, Grimm was lying on a sturdy stone table, carefully drawing out the design of a puppet construct. At the corner of the stone platform, countless engineering blueprints were either rolled up or unrolled. Each of them was filled with strange puppet beasts of different shapes and functions. Beside Grimm was a 1.8-meter-tall humanoid magic marionette that was entirely silver in color. She was quietly doing some supporting work. Magic pen, triangular board. Help me find the head of the spider golem. Not bad. Go. Give me the sample of number 7 magic iron alloy. Leave it there for now and bring me the basic data of the sword spider golem. Following Grimm's orders, the engineering assistant's marionette, which had a humanoid appearance but a body made of soft Burmese alloy, was able to complete its tasks quickly and accurately. With its help, Grimm was able to concentrate on his design work. In his mind, the AI chip's database contained the basic data and blueprints of hundreds and thousands of puppets. However, after flipping through these puppets, Grimm found it difficult to find one that he was completely satisfied with. With his memories from his previous life, Grimm was very clear that the Robocops that had appeared on Earth were fundamentally different from the metal marionettes of this world. The mechanical constructs on Earth tended to be more refined and nimble, with powerful artificial intelligence and valiant long-range firepower to determine their combat strength. However, the metal marionettes of this world had extraordinary strength, so they did not deliberately imitate human forms. After all, human-shaped marionettes had too many fatal flaws and were not suitable to be used as puppets for battle. The metal marionette that had been defeated by the Inferno Tyrant in Sky City was a human-shaped marionette. Once its legs were damaged, its mobility would plummet, and it would become a metal target that the enemy could squash at will. Hence, in order to avoid such an embarrassing situation, Grimm had used the AI chips helped to filter through many different designs of the puppet creatures. In the end, he had chosen the more mature spider form. Although the AI chip's analysis and data processing abilities were powerful, it still needed to remodel and plan a complete system when faced with a puppet beast that it had never experienced before. Hence, Grimm had opened up this puppet hall in his residence to slowly accumulate experience in the creation of puppet beasts in preparation for the later stages of the project. The spider golem that Grimm had envisioned was a fearsome beast with a disc-shaped metal body and 4 pairs of high-strength metal arthropods protruding from its sides. It did not need a humanoid body, nor did it need a head that would easily attract attention. In order to better protect Alice, it would be best to leave an entrance and exit in the spider puppet's body. The main attack method of the spider puppet was currently decided to be the magic cannons that the goblin cabbie had obtained. However, with the AI chip's optimizations and adjustments, the energy of the magic cannons had become more concentrated. This way, it would be easier to break through an enemy's defensive barrier. As for its own defense, it would rely on the toughness of various magic iron alloys and special metals. On the other hand, Grimm planned to install stress-type energy barriers on various parts of the spider puppet. This way, with both physical and magical protection, Alice's safety would be even more guaranteed. After all, according to the attack and defense system that Grimm had created for Alice, the spider puppet was mainly used for defense. The real attacker should be the Inferno Tyrant. In the past, Alice's spiritual force was not up to standard, and it was impossible for her to control a magic puppet of the Inferno Tyrant's level. However, now that she had advanced to become a witch, as long as she could raise her spiritual force to 3 points before the Battle of Destiny began, she would have the possibility of summoning the Inferno Tyrant. This way, when she encountered an enemy, she would only need to hide in the spider puppet and summon the Inferno Tyrant. Even if Grimm encountered such an enemy, he would probably have to take a detour. As for the strange spatial ability that Alice retained after fusing with the Void Stone, it would be her personal trump card, and Grimm did not consider it. With Grimm's current knowledge, he did not have the ability to analyze the detailed data of the various parts of the puppet beast with just the AI chip's data analysis. Hence, what he was creating now were some miniaturized spider puppet beasts, using them to verify some of the ideas and conjectures in his mind. The disc-shaped body of the spider puppet beast needed to be redesigned, and he needed to find the ratio of a new type of magic iron alloy. Once the spider puppet beast's 4 pairs of limbs were damaged, he needed to find a way to balance it so that it would not lose too much speed. How to set up the spider puppet beast's energy hub to maximize the output of energy. Every mission required the AI chip to go through a lot of calculations in order to obtain the best data, and he needed to verify the accuracy of the best data before he could be assured. Hence, during this period of time, Grimm spent almost every day in this puppet hall, working hard day and night to create spider puppet beasts for Alice. In another residence adjacent to Grimm's residence, in a similarly spacious and huge secret hall, Alice was sitting with her legs crossed leisurely. She was holding a small platinum hammer in her hand, striking the tortoise shell in front of her from time to time. The large secret spell hall was empty. Apart from Alice and the two large baskets, there was almost no furniture, objects, or decorations. With a single strike of the hammer, the palm-sized tortoise shell immediately broke into 4 or 5 uneven pieces. Every time this happened, Alice would excitedly lie down in front of the broken tortoise shell, carefully analyzing the extent of the shell's damage while muttering some strange syllables that were difficult for outsiders to understand. Of course, most of the time, she found nothing, and even the most basic good or bad luck was hard to come by. However, there were times when some mysterious patterns appeared on the shell fragments, and fragmented scenes would suddenly appear in Alice's mind. Unfortunately, these scenes were either turbulent, blurry, or without a head. Most of the time, even Alice could not understand what the law of fate was trying to tell her through these things. Without exception, all of Alice's divination prayers to pry into which Nina ended in failure. It was as if there was a powerful force field around which Nina, that divination spells, could not penetrate. There was no feedback at all. With the strength of a grade 1 witch, Alice had to admit that she was really a little mischievous and extraordinarily courageous person, trying to pry into a grade 2 witch. With her mental strength, she could only force herself to complete divination 5 times a day. Once the quota was exhausted, if she wanted to perform divination again, it would no longer be her mental strength and physical strength that would be consumed, but her vitality. She had already failed 4 times in a row today, and this series of failures made Alice even more upset. After throwing the tortoise shell fragments into the trash basket on the left, Alice took out a palm-sized green tortoise shell from the basket on the right. This was a piece of the dragon turtle shell. Since the dragon turtle also had the bloodline of a giant dragon, it was also a type of subdragon. Hence, its tortoise scales were the most suitable material for divination spells. It seemed that, with her own strength, prying into a high-grade wizard was simply a daydream. Just as Alice was frowning, not knowing how to use this last divination spell, she suddenly thought of something and could not help but become excited again. It was indeed not easy to pry into a high-grade wizard, but it should be much easier to pry into an opponent of similar strength, right? Alice's eyes lit up. She softly chanted, and the platinum hammer in her hand struck the tortoise shell fiercely. The power of fate. Please let me see the strongest enemy in the battle of fate. The hammer fell. Chapter 329. A Cave Made of Ice. The silhouette of a frail woman. Countless white specks of light lingered within, creating a dreamy world that was like a poem or a painting. When the fluorescent light shone, the icy fog exploded, revealing a beautiful woman's face. She looked around in astonishment. The divination result from the power of destiny was less than 3 seconds, but it was already extremely precious to Alice. Alice did not dare to hesitate. She quickly took out a clear crystal ball the size of a fist and silently engraved the image in her mind into it. All right, she had used up all the divination slots for the day, and her spiritual force had been depleted to the last drop. Alice covered her mouth and yawned. She did not even finish stretching her body before sprawling on the floor and falling into a deep sleep. In her dreams, her curled-up little hand loosened, and the glittering crystal ball fell to the ground, rolling far away. It only stopped when it bumped into the feet of a tall figure. Grimm bent down to pick up the crystal ball and placed it on his forehead. Beep. Unknown spiritual force channel detected. Link? Link. The 3 seconds of image was so short that it disappeared in a flash. Grimm did not even get a clear look at what was happening before it ended. However, the AI chip had faithfully recorded it down and stored it in its database. This should be the fate feedback from Alice's divination. Chip, do your best to analyze this 3-second image and find out all the information you can use. In the next second, the 3-second image was captured by the chip and turned into thousands of static images. Then one by one, the images appeared in his mind. Grimm felt his spiritual force drop by 2 points, which were all converted by the chip into a large amount of spiritual force to support its rapid and efficient operation. With Grimm's current strength and spells, these 2 points of spiritual force meant that he had 2 complete rank 1 spells. If he converted it into a molten core, it would be enough for him to kill a regular magus. If he converted it into a meteor shower, it would be enough to turn a 500-meter radius of the battlefield into a terrifying sea of fire. Even with Grimm's strong mental fortitude, he could not help but frown when his mental power dropped by 2 points in such a short period of time. Grimm allowed the chip in his mind to quickly process the frozen scenes. He went to Alice's side, picked her up, and went to the bedroom next door. He put her on a bed, took off her shoes and socks, and pulled the silk quilt over her. After everything was settled, Grimm walked out while rubbing his forehead. Ugh, I've never felt so tired before. I'd better go to sleep first. At that time, the chip might have already obtained a preliminary conclusion. While yawning, Grimm returned to his residence. However, at this moment, hundreds of thousands of miles away in the extreme north, Xuefu could not help but open her eyes. This was a beautiful woman who seemed to be carved out of transparent ice. Her facial features were beautiful and exquisite, but because the lines of ice and snow were too cold, they seemed a little stiff. When she suddenly opened her eyes, a glaring cold light flashed in the depths of her pupils, and a cold aura rolled around her. A crystal-clear ice armor condensed on the surface of her body, and strands of icy air pervaded the surroundings. Even the air emitted a strange cracking sound after being frozen, and the surrounding light also became a bit dimmer because of this. Xuefu looked around the world of ice and snow. There were sharp icicles and intersecting icicles everywhere. The entire cave was pure white, and no other colors could be seen. It was very quiet here, so quiet that it was almost deathly still. There was no one else, and it was impossible for there to be anyone else. In this world of ice and snow that had cost a lot of resources to create, the temperature had already reached a terrifying negative 145 degrees. If a normal person was placed in such an environment, their blood would freeze in the shortest time possible, and their heart would freeze as well. It would be impossible for them to survive. Even a quasi-magus like her, who had the innate talent of ice and snow, would need to use ice particles to protect her internal organs so that she would not freeze to death. If there was no outsider, then where did that flash of fear come from? Could it be that someone was secretly spying on her? Did it have something to do with the operation that Granny had arranged earlier? Xuefu did not agree with the idea of assassinating her competitors in advance. After such a long period of training and cultivation, she was very confident in her own strength. Even without the help of her family, it would not be a problem for her to wipe out those competitors. As the family slaughtered more and more fate candidates, Xuefu had a vague feeling that fate's blessing was getting further and further away from her. If it was in the past, it would have been difficult to spy on her from an unfamiliar enemy. Even if there was an occasional success, fate would give her some hints through a vague sense. It would never be like today, where the fear in her heart came out of nowhere, and there was no sign of it at all. If she continued to slaughter fate candidates like this, there would be a day when she would also be abandoned by the law of fate. Perhaps it was time to talk to Granny Angelina. South Fellman City, Magus Tower. Kobe the Goblin was hiding in his residence, stepping on a tall wooden stool as he chatted with the wretched, despicable, stingy Duke Gazlervi of the great Goblin Empire on the light screen in a friendly, passionate, and cordial conversation. No, Kobe jumped 3 feet high, waving the beginner puppet making handbook in his hand as he roared. You should know that I risked my life to steal this top-notch secret manual from an evil magus. You You actually want to exchange it for 200 magic crystals? Kobe, you should know that in our great goblin empire, 200 magic crystals is enough to buy 10 square kilometers of land and everything on it. If you don't want to buy land, 200 magic crystals is enough for you to hire a magic squad of 50 people. So it's already. Before he could finish, Gazlervi's voice became sharp, as if someone had suddenly grabbed a rooster by the throat. Through the light screen, it could clearly see the goblin Kobe taking out a bunch of shiny magic crystal from his waist pouch. Asterisk, ding, ding, ding. Asterisk, glittering and translucent magical crystals fell from Cabby's palm like raindrops, and they struck the hard stone floor with crisp sounds. The crisp sound was so soul-stirring that it made one's eyes red with envy. In an instant, Gazlervi's rage bar had exploded. On the light screen, Gazlervi pushed up his monocle and angrily filled the entire screen with his big, ugly face. Damn you, Kobe, you bastard. Remember, never, ever, ever. Don't flaunt your vulgar wealth in front of the great Gazlervi. As the greatest inventor of the great Goblin Empire, the most respectable engineer, and the most respected great lord, this brain full of endless knowledge is the true wealth a smart goblin should flaunt. Kobe's face was full of disdain for the exasperated Gazlervi. He lightly grabbed a handful of magic crystals and moved closer to the light screen, asking maliciously, "May I ask the greatest lord, how many magic crystals is your brain worth?" Not the greatest lord, but the most respected great lord. Gazlervi angrily corrected the little goblin's mistake. "Besides, my brain is priceless." Priceless? Doesn't that mean there's no price? It's priceless. It's not priceless. Gazlervi's roar reverberated in the secret chamber. TSK, that's the same thing. Kobe held the magic crystals in his hand and sneered. "Since you can't take out the magic crystals, what are you going to use to exchange for my top-notch secret manual?" Gazlervi quickly calmed down at the mention of the exchange. "This is a low magic plane, and the production of magic crystal mines is very small. You don't seem to be lacking in magic crystals, Continue. Then I'll use the spider tank to exchange with you." Spider tank? Didn't you say that your master has been building a golem in the shape of a spider recently? Our great goblin empire has an equally powerful completed magic tool, the spider tank. Gazlervi immediately turned into the wildest and most passionate magic tool engineer when it came to his old profession. It's made entirely of tungsten alloy and has unparalleled toughness and flexibility. The main body of the magic tool is in the shape of a spider, with 4 pairs of metal limbs, a 360-degree rotating magic cannon, a chainsaw folding metal pincer, a short-range fire-breathing device at the tail, and both sides of the body are equipped with. Before Gazlervi could finish, Kobe cut him off with an unfriendly expression. "Your teleportation device can only teleport 500 G of items. Are you sure you can teleport the good stuff you mentioned just now? Or do you want to open another small wormhole like last time? If you can't do it, what does it have to do with me if you praise it to the heavens?" Gazlervi froze. That kind of wormhole can't be used too often. In order to obtain that golem's heart, even the magic furnace in my laboratory was slightly damaged, and it took me a lot of effort to repair it. Magic furnace? What's that? Kobe's large ears immediately perked up. Although he didn't understand what the term meant, his greedy instincts allowed him to smell the scent of gold. "Do you know why I, Gazlervi, dare to call myself the greatest inventor of the great Goblin Empire? It's because I invented the magic furnace that can continuously absorb energy from the astral world. Although our great Goblin Empire doesn't have mountains of magic crystals, with this magic furnace, we have an endless supply of magic energy. The future rise of the Goblin Empire was single-handedly created by me." At the mention of the magic furnace, the slightly enthusiastic Gazlervi instantly became fanatical. The way he was waving his slender arms and legs around made people want to gasp in awe. There's such a great invention. The goblin cabbie's bean-like eyes widened, and he immediately put on a flattering expression. Then, the greatest inventor, Lord Gazlervi, Can you let me take a look at this epic-making work? Chapter 330. Magic Furnace? Grim muttered. Are you sure that's what it said? Yes, master, I'm absolutely sure. The gnome cabbie still had a fawning expression on his face, but a crafty glint flickered in his beady eyes. In order to gain his trust, I took the initiative to give that book to him. I didn't ask for anything in exchange. I only wanted it to let me see the mysterious things it spoke of. And so it brought me around its magic machinery lab and its spider tank with a light screen. What about the magic furnace? Of course, that included the magic furnace. You did well. Grim nodded in satisfaction. With your intelligence, you must have left behind an image. Of course, as long as it's master's orders. Cabbie will do his best to fulfill it. Cabbie immediately took out a button-sized crystal. All the images are in here. Grim smiled in satisfaction once again. Even Grim was surprised by Cabbie's obedience and quick-wittedness. He thought that betraying the interests of his own kind would cause him to retaliate, but who would have thought that he would accept it without hesitation? He was even able to draw inferences and actively helped Grim extract the secrets of the Goblin Grand Duke. With such a loyal subordinate, Grim naturally could not be stingy. He rewarded Cabbie with a large number of magic crystals and even a storage belt that Alice did not have. With this, Cabbie no longer had to wear 7 or 8 pouches at once. After sending Cabbie away, Grim immediately sent his mental power into the image recording crystal. In less than a quarter of an hour, Grim's expression suddenly changed, and he slowly put down the crystal with a shocked expression. Damn it, this wasn't a magic furnace, but a spatial furnace. No, to be more precise, it was a prototype spatial furnace. Grim suppressed his excitement, and once again replayed the scene he saw in the crystal in his mind. Finally, the scene stopped at the magic furnace towering high up in the Goblin Hall. It was a huge metal monster that could shock anyone. At first glance, the height of the tank was 300 meters and the diameter of the tank was 100 meters. It stood there, shaped like a huge capsule. However, the outer wall of this capsule was completely made of a special alloy that flashed with a cold blue light, and what it contained inside was not the substance of the plane, but the ceaselessly rumbling void energy. Goblins could be ignorant, but wizards who were known as the servants of knowledge couldn't be ignorant either. Even if it was just a low-grade light screen, even if the light screen was half a kilometer away from the magical furnace, the complex spatial energy field that filled the entire hall could not be concealed. This also meant that what was burning in the magical furnace was not the elemental energy that the goblins believed themselves to be, but the chaos energy of the void world. Void energy was chaos energy, not elemental energy. This type of energy was not that type of energy. The two names were similar, but the meaning they represented was as different as heaven and earth. According to the most ancient knowledge, the multiverse that Grim resided in was immersed in the endless void energy. The upper plane, the material plane, the elemental plane, the lower plane, everything was immersed in this boundless, undulating sea of void energy. This was an incomparably violent chaos energy, and it seemed to have the evil ability to distort one's mind. Thus, there were very few creatures and races that could directly use this energy. However, every individual or race that could control chaos energy was a powerful being that stood at the peak of the world. In order to protect the living beings of the plane from being infected by the chaos energy, almost all material planes would spontaneously produce a barrier to isolate the void energy. This barrier was like a fetal membrane that gave birth to all living beings. It would pacify the void energy that entered through the barrier into docile and obedient elemental energy, and then break it down into elemental particles with different characteristics according to the laws of the plane. Wizards, magical creatures, elves, divine spell users. The extraordinary power that they possessed came from the ubiquitous elemental energy. They were docile and obedient, and could be controlled and summoned by the consciousness. They were the source of the powerful wizards, and they could directly control and absorb this power. As for the chaos energy, it was an energy poison that wizards feared like tigers. Anyone who came into contact with it would definitely die. Just like Alice, who had suffered a huge loss, foolishly fusing with the chaos energy in the Void Stone. If it wasn't for the unexpected advancement that interrupted the assimilation process, Alice would have long been assimilated into a void creature through and through by the Void Stone. However, it was not completely impossible to use chaos energy. At least the wizard towers built by wizards could absorb chaos energy and break it down and store it in the elemental pool, which was a necessary reserve for the operation of the wizard's tower. However, to achieve this, one could not do without the wizard tower. A wizard tower could easily be a few hundred meters tall, and the space inside could accommodate hundreds or even thousands of wizards. Only a wizard tower that was built using many rare resources could come into contact with chaos energy without being damaged. However, at this moment, Grimm was surprised to find a group of goblins from another plane who did not have any elemental talent, but could use simple and crude magical machinery to use chaos energy. How could he not be surprised? How strange this world was. Looking at the crisscrossing cables on the light screen, looking at the steaming pneumatic equipment, looking at the goblin engineers wearing large space helmets, Grimm felt the world spinning in front of him. The ignorant were truly fearless. Were they not afraid that the space furnace would explode and raze the entire goblin empire to the ground? With the violent nature of chaos energy, how could it be tamed by a group of goblins who could not even shoot elemental fireballs? This was illogical. Countless curses ran through his mind. However, Grimm's interest in the goblin plane of existence was piqued. If he could gather a team in the future, he would choose this goblin empire as his first target of invasion. As long as he could get his hands on their magical machinery technology and study this magic furnace thoroughly, with the help of the strange methods of the wizards, it might not be impossible for him to build his own magical machinery empire. Grimm could not help but feel a little excited as he thought about this. Night dimension. Insects and cicadas chirped incessantly in the lush green forest. The lush forest undulated slightly with the mountain breeze. A small team was making their way through the forest with difficulty. The person in charge of opening the path was a burly man wearing chainmail armor. The double-edged battle axe that was as big as a wheel was as light as a feather in his hands. Every time he chopped, he would carve a wide path in the forest. Although there was a path, bushes, vines, and thorns still covered the path, making it difficult for the team to move. There were only 5 people in the team. Other than the man with the battle axe leading the way, the others at the back were also burly and strong. Their gray traveling cloaks bulged up, and, judging from his shape, they seemed to be carrying some large weapons with them. Loker, how much longer until we reach our destination? I hate this hot and humid environment to death. Smack! One of the guys in the middle of the team grumbled and slapped a mosquito that refused to leave his face. The mosquitoes in the forest were indeed ferocious. Just their heads alone were the size of a finger. If they were full of human blood, their ugly and wrinkled abdomens would expand to the size of a palm. With a single slap from this guy, the mosquito's abdomen would rupture, and he would be splattered with his own blood. Damn it, damn it, damn it. The harsh environment made him irritable. I hate these mosquitoes. I hate this forest. I hate everything. I don't want to run anymore. I'd rather go back and fight those blood-sucking demons. I'd rather die in battle than rot in this damned forest. Silence. The burly man at the back of the team was obviously the leader. He scolded sternly. No one will stop you if you want to die, but you can't drag others down with you. Shimu, don't forget your glory as a radiant knight. Glory, glory. The guy called Shimu had obviously broken down. You still talk about glory every day. We're being chased around by those damned wizards like dogs. Where's the glory and dignity? The royal bloodline has been wiped out by them with evil sorcery. What do we do from now on? Shimu's panicked words silenced the entire team. The crushing defeat in the Greenland forest, the dragon attack on the capital, and the invasion of the giant dragon that spread across the continent. All of these brought to the kingdom of knights could not be compared to the loss of the royal bloodline. As the wizards seized control of the continent, the once glorious demon hunters became stray dogs. They were bitten by hordes of wolves, tigers, and leopards until they bled profusely. However, those who wanted to attack them and exchange their knights' heads for the wizards' rewards did not pose a real threat to them. The terrifying wizards who were on their tail were the real nightmares they needed to avoid. The former Blood Queen was no longer elegant. Instead, she had become a bloody witch that terrified even the Radiant Knights and Spellbreaker Knights. The demonic insects were no longer weak. As they sucked their flesh and blood, the terrifying insect demon became more and more terrifying. Many of the knights in the team died tragically in the mouths of the millions of beetles it controlled. Silence. I think I heard something. The leader of the team, the strong man with the giant axe, suddenly shushed them. Everyone immediately shut their mouths. They held their breath and listened attentively to the movements of the grass in the forest. Amidst the rustling of the forest, there seemed to be a faint, strange sound ringing. It was the sound of flying monsters flapping their wings. It's the bloody witch. Go! Everyone go! The team leader's expression changed drastically as he shouted with all his might. Amidst the loud shout, a black swarm of bats swarmed out of the forest in the distance and covered them like a dark cloud. Chapter 331. In the dense forest, a sea of lush trees. The chirping of insects and cicadas was instantly replaced by the sound of flapping wings. Puff, puff, puff. A swarm of bats swarmed out like a dark cloud and surrounded the team in an instant. They had short, glossy black fur, scarlet eyes, white fangs, and a body the size of a wash basin. These were not the wild bats that were commonly seen in the forest, but a group of vampire bats that had been modified by evil witchcraft. With their talent, they could not be considered orthodox vampires. At most, they were just blood slaves and derivatives created by orthodox vampires. Using their combat power to fight against the 2 Radiant Knights and 3 magic-breaking knights was like throwing an egg against a rock. They could not even withstand a single blow. However, after the 5 knights threw off the coarse cloaks that hindered them, they nervously gathered together with their backs against each other, as if they were afraid of something. In the deepest part of the dense forest in the distance, a tall figure wrapped in a gorgeous red dress was standing on a thick branch, peering at the night squad through the gaps between the mottled leaves. Beside her, on every branch of the tall, ancient tree, there were countless vampire bats hanging upside down. Compared to the swarm of bats, the hundreds of vampire bats hanging all over the tree were bloody, which Mary's personal guards that she truly valued. Each of them had the body of a calf, gray fur, and hairy, sharp, and thin faces. They also had human-like features. They hung upside down on the branches, vigilantly watching the forest around them. From time to time, they would open their mouths full of sharp teeth and emit high-frequency sound waves that were hard for the human ear to hear, maintaining a close connection with the sentries outside. However, beside Mary, there were 8 humanoid vampires dressed like knights, with blood-red eyes and fangs. They were the trump card that allowed Mary to hunt the fleeing knights without any scruples, the Blood Knights. There were 8 Blood Knights. 3 of them were Grade 2 Blood Knights, and 5 were Grade 1 Blood Knights. Their predecessors were the Radiant Knights and magic-breaking knights who once ruled this realm. However, after Mary's embrace and witchcraft, they had lost their true nature and became first-generation vampires who followed Mary's lead. But in this way, their intelligence would be significantly reduced compared to before, and they would also forget more than half of the combat skills they had before they were reincarnated. That was why a Rank 2 Blood Knight could only display the strength of a Rank 1 elite sorcerer despite having a strong physique and powerful regeneration abilities. This made Mary feel extremely regretful. As for the Rank 1 Blood Knights, they were just vampires with the strength of a wizard. The first group of vampire bats were like a pack of wolves circling around a flock of sheep. They let out ear-piercing screeches as they darted left and right in the dense forest. More than 600 bats gathered in the dense forest that was less than 100 meters away. They used their bodies to completely cover the area. What was even more bizarre was that despite the high density of the creatures, they did not collide with each other at all. They couldn't help but admire their flying skills. After living in hiding for half a year, this group of demon hunter knights had long since lost their former strength. Without the support of the Kingdom of Knights, they no longer had magic colts to ride on, nor did they have magic crystals to support them. They could not eat their fill, wear their warm clothes, or sleep well. This caused their combat strength to plummet. Without magic colts, they could only rely on their feet to traverse mountains and rivers. Without magic crystals, their rune swords were like fire sticks that could no longer produce scorching elemental flames. If they wanted to activate the semi-long-range energy blades, they could only rely on their own energy reserves. This obviously couldn't last long. Even so, when they held the rune swords in their hands, the dazzling fluorescence of energy began to roll in their bodies. The combat strength displayed by this group of high-ranking demon hunter knights was still as ferocious and unparalleled. Streaks of energy blades shot out, destroying everything in their path. It was impossible to defend against. Regardless of whether it was a tall tree that required a person to wrap their arms around it, or a branch that was as thick as an arm, or the glossy, black, leathery body of the vampire bat, they were all sliced into two by the berserk blade, before exploding into a sky full of plant fragments and stinking purple blood. The five-man squad was clearly experienced. They used the energy blades to open a path while moving quickly through the forest, looking as though they were determined to break out of the encirclement with their lives. The numerous vampire bats were obviously helpless against them. After they transformed into bats, they belonged to the category of targets without or with light armor. It was simply a dream to rely on their frail bodies to contend against the energy blades that had an attack power of 30 to 50 degrees. So they could only squeak and dance in the sky, trying to use their numbers to disrupt the enemy's movement. As for the vampire bats that rushed into the Knight Squad's defensive circle, they met an even more tragic end. Rune swords made of special magic steel danced in the hands of the high-ranking demon hunter knights. The swords flashed as fast as lightning. The 5 swords formed a sword circle. Before the vampire bats could even get close to them, they were killed one by one. Mary, who stood at the periphery and watched from afar, did not feel anything when her subordinates were slaughtered. To her, only the Blood Knights and low-ranking vampires around her were worth paying attention to. As for the blood thralls and derivatives on the periphery, she would not feel any heartache no matter how many of them died. If their numbers were not enough, she could find a human city and hold a blood feast. The number of low-ranking vampires would be replenished very quickly. So, these guys were sacrificial lambs. Who cared if they were worth it or not? But in this wilderness and barren mountain, it was still somewhat difficult to replenish the blood thralls. So Mary did not intend to let these cannon fodder be used up too much. With a slight wave of Mary's hand, nearly half of the 100 or so low-ranking vampires that were entrenched beside her flew up in an instant. They flapped their wings and blended into the vampire bat swarm. "Be careful, there are vampires coming," the leader of the knights in the squad warned in a low voice. During this half a year of chasing and fleeing, countless companions had already fallen miserably under the sharp fangs of these vampires, either due to physical exhaustion or due to carelessness. These vampires might not have outstanding attack and defense, but they were extremely good at fighting. They blended into the ordinary vampire bat swarm. Once they saw an opportunity, they would quickly pounce and transform into their human forms the moment they reached the target side. They did not evade the attacks of the knights at all. Instead, they pounced on the knights, desperately scratching and biting at the flesh of the knights that fell outside their protective gear. Such fearless attacks were simply impossible to defend against. If there were only 1 or 2 vampires fighting like this, the knights could still rely on their sharp swords and strong armor to deal with them. But if a group of vampires swarmed in, even a magic-breaking knights would find it hard to defend against such an attack. So, with the addition of the vampires, the Battle of the Knights of Light became more difficult. The physical strength of the Knights of Light was far superior to that of the vampires, so killing them was as easy as chopping melons and vegetables. Therefore, the vampires desperately urged the vampire bat swarm to rush up and entangle the two Knights of Light. The vampires then quickly gathered together and continuously attacked the defensive circle around the three magic-breaking knights. In the violent and bloody battle, one of the magic-breaking knights only cared about waving his long sword and killing the mutated bats that flew past him. He did not even notice the low shrubs under his feet. With a stagger, he took 2 steps back and actually distanced from the defensive circle. Such an unforeseen event immediately made him break out in cold sweat. Before he could stabilize his body, he waved his long sword and wanted to rush back to the side of his companions. But it was too late. Rustle. In an instant, countless vampire bats rushed into the battle circle of the knights through this gap. With a terrifying number, all the knights were thrown into confusion. And just when they did not have time to deal with it, a group of vampires descended from the sky, madly using their bodies to attack the Knights of Light's sword formation. Blood splattered and limbs flew. But in this bloody storm, the figures of the Knights of Light were also pushed further and further away, gradually disappearing from everyone's sight. Puff, puff, puff. A few consecutive energy blades soared into the sky, instantly cutting the group of vampire bats into pieces. Blood rained down from the sky, and everyone's body was dyed red. They had just cleared out this group of enemies, and before they could adjust the violent energy in their bodies, a new batch of vampire bats swarmed in from all directions, once again suppressing them in place. Through the gaps in the disorderly swarm of vampire bats, the knights could vaguely hear the sounds of their companions fighting and shouting a dozen steps away. But soon, with a shrill scream, the sounds of the distance gradually stopped, leaving only the strange sucking sound that made one's teeth ache and legs go weak. "No, Chief, we have to save Staffy." The burly loker who was wielding the giant axe was already panting from exhaustion, his knotted muscles glistening with sweat. "Save what? Can't you see that he's already dead?" Sim roared angrily as he hacked with all his might. The team was no longer complete. If they stayed here because of someone who was bound to die, it would be difficult for them to escape today. Hence, he hated Rockhall's suggestion to the bone. Rockhall was all brawn and no brains. "I don't care. I won't leave any of my brothers behind." Loker, whose eyes were bloodshot, roared angrily. He turned around and used his giant axe to open a path, fighting his way into the distance alone. Damn it! Damn it! Damn it! As expected, before Sim could curse, the leader of the Knights of Light had already made a decision. "You take Sim and leave first. I'll bring Loker back. We'll meet at the agreed location." After speaking, the leader's body was enveloped in a dazzling fluorescence. These runic energies came from his body and condensed into an armor of light on the surface of his body. This also gave him an even more violent and ferocious combat ability. When the dazzling fluorescence of the blade filled the sky, bat corpses fell like rain. Go quickly. I'll catch up to you in a while." Chapter 332. As the night squad split up and advanced, the battle in the dense forest became more and more intense. "Master, let me and Ken attack. I promise we'll kill all of them." The one who spoke was Mary's most powerful subordinate, Blood Knight Winsoul. Before becoming a Blood Knight, Winsoul seemed to be the most prestigious leader of the conservative faction among the Knights of Radiance. Unfortunately, at this moment, he had lost the glory and pride of a Knight of Radiance. He had become a loyal servant crawling in front of Mary. Even at this moment, Blood Knight Winsoul did not hesitate or hold back, even if he had to raise the butcher's knife against his former comrades. On the contrary, in his blood-red eyes, Mary could see a trace of excitement because of the approaching feast of slaughter. "Go, my warrior. Use the enemy's head to show off your bravery." Mary blinked her crimson eyes that were as resplendent as rubies and ordered softly, "Apart from the 2 Radiant Knights, you can slaughter the rest." With Mary's charming and clear voice, The remaining half of the vampires immediately left their nest and followed a few blood knights into the horrifying battlefield that had suddenly become white-hot. When the surroundings became quiet, the vampire Count Winsoul, who had followed Mary since the beginning, appeared beside her. Before becoming a vampire, Winlier used to be the supreme ruler of Blue Hill City. However, in the camp of vampires that valued strength, these worldly identities were not worth mentioning at all. Therefore, in order to not lose Mary's favor, Count Winsoul still abandoned his past identity and willingly became an inconspicuous low-level vampire by Mary's side. In this team that valued bravery and strength, vampires like Winsoul who had no talents and specialties were not valued at all. However, this was still not a problem for Winsoul, who was born with foresight. After following Mary for less than half a month, he had become an indispensable military counselor by Mary's side with his excellent planning and ruthless methods. Moreover, this old fox was quite good at hiding his strength. When Winsoul and the other blood knights clustered around Mary, he would hide far away and never reveal himself. Only when there was no one beside Mary would he come over and solve his master's problems with his extraordinary mind. "How is it? Have you found any traces of the bug?" Mary asked without turning her head. Ever since Mary discovered Venlier's incomparable talent, she assigned him more than 10 low-level vampires. And it was because of these dozen or so subordinates that Winlier quickly became Mary's most trusted spy, leader, and intelligence chief. Dazzling lights burst out from the distant battlefield one after another, and small suns rose slowly in the forest. The ancient trees collapsed, and the sea of trees surged. Flocks of vampire bats dashed left and right in the dense forest, dodging the wild and violent energy. Mary felt a tingle in her soul. This was the soul backlash brought about by the destruction of her direct, subordinate blood thralls. It was obvious from this that the intensity of the battle in the depths of the forest was obvious, and it had already arrived at a state of life and death. But even so, Mary still stood proudly at the top of the ancient tree without the slightest intention of helping. Being powerful was one way for a vampire to rise to power, but having many powerful blood thralls might also be another way to rise to power. That partner, who had already returned to the sorcerer world, seemed to be an expert in creating powerful subordinates that saved him time and effort. Hence the saying, "One is marked by the company one keeps." For no reason, Mary also began to be infatuated with this barbaric fighting style of roaring in, roaring out, and madly ganging up on the enemy. But Mary knew that she did not have the foresight ability of that guy, so she placed all her trust and hope in this cunning vampire who suddenly appeared out of nowhere. She began to gradually increase the authority in his hands. "Master, although the outer sentries did not find any traces of that bug, I'm sure that it is still lying in ambush around us." Winlier turned into a gentle human noble and used his clever brain to analyze the situation for Mary. This is already the nest of the last batch of demon-hunting knights. If that bug does not want to miss the opportunity to strengthen its army, it will definitely fight with us for rations here. Yes, continue. That evil bug does not get along with you, Master, so will definitely be on guard against you. Nibbling away at the enemy's small troops bit by bit is something that both of us will do. But if one of us can't help but attack the demon-hunting camp, I'm afraid that regardless of the outcome, the other party will attack from behind. That's why I gave you so many people. Didn't I want you to find the bug's whereabouts in advance? I'm afraid that will be very difficult. Winlier frowned and smiled bitterly. Lord Evilbug is the best at hiding. If it wants to hide underground and not come out, it will be very difficult to find it with just a dozen or so spies. It's better if it doesn't come out. Then let it keep hiding in the dark. Mary's bloody eyes narrowed, and she could not help but say proudly, "We can take the opportunity to continue to grow stronger. Let's see how it can compete with me when it snowballs into a snowy mountain. Master, we also have to be careful when we move." Winlier could not help but worry. "I'm worried that Lord Evilbug will very likely attract the demon-hunting knights to deal with us and force us to fight it in advance." I understand. Mary was no longer the unrestrained girl who fought recklessly. She thought for a moment after hearing Winlier's words. After this battle, the outer legions may suffer a lot of losses. But as long as one of the two Radiant Knights can survive the embrace, we will still be on the winning side. After the battle, I will assign another 100 men from the outer legions to you. Keep an eye on that bug. Do not let it suddenly come out and disrupt my plan. Do you understand? Yes. Winlier immediately bowed. Just as the two were talking softly, the battle in the dense forest suddenly began to extend into the distance. It seemed that the Radiant Knight could no longer withstand the encirclement of the two Blood Knights, and the many vampires, and was desperately trying to break out of the encirclement. Let's go take a look. Mary brought Winlier up into the sky, and abruptly transformed into two giant bats, one red and one gray. They flapped their wings and rushed into the forest. When they were far away, a few of the bat's subordinates hiding in the surrounding forest did not notice anything amiss. Only then did they crawl out of the bushes, tree holes, and bushes, flapping their wings as they chased after them. The strange sounds of energy explosions rose and fell, extending into the distance. Finally, after a quarter of an hour, the forest where the bloody Witch Mary was once again quiet. However, this silence did not last for more than a few minutes before it was broken by a new kind of strange sound. The black soil around a tall, ancient tree silently arched up into a huge mound. When a mound was more than a meter high, the top suddenly burst open, and countless terrifying bugs surged out from within. These bugs were not big, each only the size of a fist. However, the black carapace on their bodies was shiny, and there was a faint magic aura shining on it. After the black beetles crawled out of the wormhole, they did not scatter in all directions. Instead, they gathered together and bulged up in a crooked manner, forming a strange humanoid bug. A moment later, the humanoid bug stabilized its body, and the countless wriggling beetles pieced together the hideous, malevolent face of the demonic bug in Titch. Mary! In Titch's strange bug body emitted a deep insect hiss that made one's teeth ache and legs go weak. Without that, Brad, do you think you're still a match for me? You want to lure me out and kill me? Kakik, how could I not want to devour your group of vampires and use your blood essence to nourish my great bug body that is about to take shape? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I didn't expect you to have 8 Magus rank vampire subordinates. However, compared to the great in Titch, your strength is not even worth mentioning. Kakik, following in Titch's sharp insect hiss, the black beetles that swarmed out of the wormhole became larger and larger. Among them, the number of carrion beetles with black shells, green wings, and liver mortis spots on their backs had already reached an astonishing 34. These carrion beetles were no longer larvae like they used to be. After half a year of continuous nourishment, these 34 carrion beetles had all matured, and each of them had the battle strength of a Magus. Although in Titch's main body only had the strength of a newly advanced Magus, he was confident that he could defeat any elite Magus with this group of subordinates. Even if he were to face Grim again, he was confident that he would win. Grim, haven't you always wanted to kill me? Then I'll first get rid of your accomplice. Then I'll go to the Magus world to look for you. Kakik. Titch closed his eyes and carefully checked the eyes and ears of the flying insects that he had set up in the distance. He unexpectedly discovered 2 fish that had escaped the net, that had just escaped. One of them was the prey that he had been drooling over, the Radiant Knight. He couldn't help but be overjoyed by this discovery. Under the command of his strange insect hisses, thousands of black beetles converged into a black torrent as if they were moving their arms and fingers. They poured back into the broken wormhole and quickly approached the target through the insect tunnel dug out from underground. In the blink of an eye, not a single beetle could be seen in the forest that had been like a terrifying insect nest. 30 miles away, at a mountain stream, amidst the cheerful flowing sounds of the clear stream, 2 tall figures with tattered clothes and bloodstains crawled out of the stream. They lay prone on the overgrown shore, gasping for breath. In the distant forest, there were countless black figures circling quickly, as if searching for something. The two were slightly alarmed, and once again submerged their bodies into the ice-cold water, leaving only their eyes and nostrils above the water, silently monitoring the movements in the distance. Relying on the ice-cold water to cool off their body temperature, these vampire bats that had a keen sense of smell for humans lost track of the two. After searching for a long time without finding anything, they could only rustle and disappear into the forest in the distance. Wait a while more. We'll go out when they're far away. The radiant knight named Soros ordered softly. Sim, whose body was covered in wounds, could only endure the pain and continue soaking in the water. The surrounding forest gradually quieted down. It was getting quieter and quieter, so much so that the two of them began to feel fear. Chapter 333. The battle erupted abruptly. The two knights sensed danger the moment they smelled the rotting corpses. But before they could rush out of the stream, a terrifying black torrent of beetles rushed out from the knee-high grass nearby. Soros, who had dealt with the evil insects for a long time, knew that these were no ordinary mutated insects. They were the larvae of carrion beetles that the insect demons had nurtured with human flesh and blood. Although they were not big, the toughness of their shells was comparable to a finger's thickness of metal armor. Although this toughness was not enough to stop him from chopping them down like vegetables, he could not stop the endless number of beetles. Even with Soros' overwhelming strength, it was difficult to defend against the tide-like attack of the beetles. The larvae of carrion beetles did not have any special attack methods. Just their tough shells and poisonous mouths were enough. They had been eating rotten flesh all year round, so their saliva was naturally poisonous. After being bitten or scratched by their terrifying pincers and sawtooth-like mouthparts, the poison would stick to the wound, causing the flesh to fester and the wound to be unable to heal. Therefore, even a radiant knight would find it hard to protect himself when surrounded by a group of fist-sized beetles with steel-like carapaces and poisonous attacks. As for the magic breaker knight Shimu, who was already riddled with scars, he was drowned by the swarm of beetles after killing more than a dozen larvae, leaving only a wriggling humanoid beetle pile on the ground. Asterisk whoosh, asterisk, a dazzling fluorescent light burst out of the radiant knight Soros' body. In a dense and violent energy explosion, the beetle larvae gathered around him were sent flying. A powerful, almost terrifying energy storm gathered on his runic longsword, but when the violent sword attack was ready to be unleashed, he instinctively hesitated. With this strike, the dense swarm of beetles suffered heavy losses, but Shimu, who was surrounded by the swarm, could not even think of surviving. But in that moment of hesitation, he felt a sharp pain in his lower limbs. The beetle larvae that had surrounded him once again had bitten through his steel boots and stabbed their pincers into his calf. At the same time, a small energy storm erupted among the swarm of beetles. Amidst the swarm of beetles, broken insect limbs and disgusting insect juices filled his vision. Maxime, the mage breaker knight, roared and crawled out of the swarm of insects. Incomparably violent energy flowed. Shimu let out a roar and grabbed a beetle with both hands, forcefully squeezing them until they exploded. Soros was first startled, then overjoyed. He shouted, "Come here, I'll help you break out of the encirclement. Don't worry about me." A stern look flashed across Shimu's rough face. "Sir, attack quickly." "Don't worry about me. I can't do it anymore." Soros was slightly taken aback, but when his gaze fell on Shimu, he instantly understood. On the parts of Shimu's body that could not be covered by his metal armor, lumps were moving quickly under his skin. Some of the beetles had already burrowed into his body and were frantically devouring his flesh and blood. Looking at Soros, who had a pained expression on his face, Shimu's tyrannical energy aura grew more and more violent. "Sir, I'll take my leave first." Shimu roared mournfully. She had finally self-destructed. The incomparably violent shockwave from the explosion brought along bone fragments and flesh filled with energy, instantly engulfing a wide space of nearly 20 meters. Countless beetles were riddled with holes, and the dead and injured were scattered everywhere. Although the carapaces of the beetles that were slightly further away were not penetrated, they were swept up by the violent shockwave. Their fragile organs and brains were blasted into a bloody paste by the shockwave, and they too fell to the ground and died. With just one attack, close to 100 larvae of the carrion beetles were dragged down by Shimu and perished together with her. Shimu, Radiant Knight Soros, was so angry that his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He no longer hesitated in the violent attack that he had been preparing for a long time. In the next second, an even more violent and ferocious energy storm exploded in the swarm of insects. The egg-shaped shockwave swept countless black beetles in all directions. Wherever it passed, it was as easy as crushing dry weeds and smashing rotten wood. It was impossible to resist. This attack fully displayed the terrifying and violent side of a rank 2 Radiant Knight's attack. Although Knights did not have as many long-range attacks as spellcasters, they were not as flexible. However, when it came to the concentration of energy for close-range attacks, even a magus riding a horse would not be able to catch up to a knight's ability to penetrate defenses. After all, most of the energy gathered by magi came from the elemental energy drifting around in space. Although it was powerful, it was somewhat scattered. On the other hand, the explosive power of a knight came from within their bodies, and they could completely control this energy as if it was their own limbs. Hence, if an elemental magus of the same rank was allowed to get close to a knight, it basically meant that he was not far from death. One of the main reasons why bloodline magi were revered was that they were adept at both close and long-range combat. Their close combat ability was not the least bit weaker than their ranged attacks. This made it so that they did not have any obvious weaknesses. Even with Soros' strength, he could not easily unleash such a violent and ferocious attack. In the past, they had the support of abundant mana crystals. Once they exhausted the energy in their runic equipment, they could find an opportunity to replace the energy crystals. Now, however, they were stray dogs. Where would they find the opportunity to replenish their mana crystals? Hence, after unleashing such an earth-shattering attack, Soros' legs went soft, and he almost knelt on the ground. At this moment, a strange rustling sound came from the bushes in the distance. Huge black beetles with green wings and liver mortis spots on their backs flapped their wings and slowly flew over from afar. Damn it, they're real carrion beetles. Asterisk whoosh whoosh. Asterisk 2 bright energy blades shot out from the sword, and 2 carrion beetles in front of them flipped a few times in the air. However, when they flapped their wings and adjusted their posture, there were no obvious wounds on their black carapaces. Damn it, these beetles are even harder than before. With Radiant Knight Soros' strength, the 2 sword strikes he unleashed just now should have at least 50 to 60 degrees of energy. However, these beetles actually withstood it without batting an eyelid. This made Soros' expression even more unsightly. Fortunately, these carrion beetles were not fast. Before they could form an absolute number, it would be difficult for them to surround and kill a grade 2 Radiant Knight. Soros did not dare to stay here for long. Surging energy gathered behind him, forming a pair of dazzling wings of light. With the help of the wings of light, he sprinted forward faster and faster, higher and higher, as if he was flying in the air. This was a combat ability that the Radiant Knight had developed after coming into contact with runic energy for a long time. But in the end, it was just a special use of runic energy. Just as Radiant Knight Soros was about to charge out of the encirclement of the beetles, a lightning-fast shadow suddenly flew into the sky and collided with him. Asterisk boom. Asterisk a muffled sound rang out, followed by an invisible shockwave. Soros' wings of light suddenly vanished, and he fell to the ground. Along with him was the mysterious black shadow. In that collision, Soros' entire body was wrapped in thick armor and energy. In addition to his flying speed, one could imagine the impact that the shadow that collided with him had to bear. The shadow fell into a clump of bushes. When he stood up in a crooked manner, black spots were continuously falling off the surface of the body, formed by countless black beetles. Actually, they were not black spots, but dead beetles. Even the demonic beetle in tech was not unscathed from the collision just now. Seeing that the mastermind behind the black beetle tide had finally revealed himself, Soros, who was still spinning around, roared furiously. Streaks of sharp energy blades slashed at Intech's beetle body. 3 carrion beetles flapped their wings and flew over, blocking in front of Intech. They relied on their black carapaces that were as hard as heavy armor to withstand all the attacks. But before they could adjust their bodies, Soros had already pounced on them. The runic longsword in his hand that was as bright as a lightsaber flashed continuously, directly piercing into their wide-open mouths, shaking their innards into a pile of bloody paste. Although the carapaces of the carrion beetles were tough, it was difficult for the insides of the beetles to be as tough. Therefore, faced with the piercing longsword of such concentrated energy, Soros was able to quickly kill them one by one. Seeing that the 3 carrion beetles that he had carefully cultivated were killed, the scorpion in tech leisurely stood up and let out a sharp hissing sound at Soros. In an instant, countless scorpions shot out of his mouth and rained down on Soros. Soros brandished his longsword. The violent energy blades no longer left his body, but attached themselves to the runic longsword, instantly forming a solid shield in front of him. All the scorpions that collided with his blade storm were instantly disintegrated into pieces. Stinking purplish-black insect juices splattered everywhere. Soros, on the other hand, was rapidly approaching Intech while brandishing his longsword to fend off the endless stream of insect attacks. As a knight, his greatest disadvantage was that he did not have any mobility. If he wanted to escape, he could only kill his way out of the encirclement. There was no other way. However, just as his speed was being suppressed by the demonic beetle in tech, the horde of black-armored, green-winged carrion beetles had already surrounded him. If he wanted to break out of the encirclement now, it would be countless times more difficult than before. Don't even think of escaping. Stay here and become a part of my beetle body. Intech hissed sharply, the ear-piercing insect hisses so loud that people almost wanted to cover their ears and not hear it. The battle on the battlefield instantly heated up again. Chapter 334. The battle in the forest had reached its climax almost as soon as it began. One side was hunting ferociously, while the other was vowing to break out of the encirclement. Both sides had no leeway to sit down and negotiate. Hence, the moment they encountered each other, it quickly turned into a battle of life and death. With the Radiant Knight's incomparably violent strength, no one in the battlefield could stop his advance. Hence, even with Intech's strange witchcraft, Soros was still able to hack away at the beetle carcasses, its body mutilated. However, Intech, who had completely transformed into a beetle, seemed to have an immortal body. No matter how crazily his opponent ravaged his body, he could rely on the endless supply of scorpions to recover with a snap of his fingers. Moreover, relying on him to attract Soros's firepower, more and more corpse scarabs closed in, gradually sealing off all escape routes. 3 to 5 corpse scarabs might not be able to do anything to a grade 2 knight, and might even be able to find an opportunity to counterattack. However, when 20 to 30 corpse scarabs closed in, using their hard carapaces to form a wall, Soros had already lost his chance to slaughter them. The corpse scarab's huge pincers kept opening and closing, and could even cut through wood as thick as a bowl. If it weren't for Soros's powerful runic energy combined with his runic equipment to form a layer of tough and impenetrable energy armor, the carrion scarabs would have torn him into pieces and devoured him whole. However, the runic energy condensed in Soros's body was limited and could not be depleted for a long period of time. Hence, risking his life to break out of the encirclement became his only choice. The battle between the two sides became increasingly heated. Just as the battle by the stream was in full swing, a strange army was rapidly approaching. Between the tall and dense foliage, a huge gray bat was silently gliding back and forth with its wings spread. Relying on the flying scouts scattered throughout the forest to guide the way, they headed straight for the sea of insects without hesitation. At some point in time, Mary and the 8 Blood Knights were already standing proudly at the top of a tall tree, less than half a mile away from the battlefield. Beside Mary, the crafty-looking Windlear was stooped and pointing at the distant battlefield, as if he was explaining something. It was precisely because of Windlear's strategy of casting a long line to catch a big fish that the vampires intentionally missed the Radiant Knight Soros, that they were able to fish out the evil worm in Tick who was hiding nearby. But at this moment, when all the protagonists stood on the stage, all schemes and tricks were meaningless. Next, if he wanted to achieve his wish, then he could only rely on peerlessly tyrannical combat, strength, and ferocious slaughter. That was why Windlear wisely lowered his stance and retreated behind the Blood Knights. Even in the midst of a fierce battle, the demonic worm, Indic, still raised his head, his empty eye sockets staring straight at Mary, who was dressed in a bright red dress. The two of them stared at each other. The blood food here is very delicious, but it's a little crowded for 2 people. Intitch's insect hisses were sharp and noisy, sounding exceptionally ear-piercing. The leathery bat wings behind Mary flapped slightly, allowing her to float in the air. Looking down at the violent battlefield from above, Mary licked her beautiful red lips. Her blue eyes gradually turned blood red. Yeah, it's too crowded here. There's no room for the 2 of us. Why? Have you already thought of a way to leave? Haven't you been looking for me? I've come out today, and you've come as promised. Why? Are we going to fight here? Let's fight. The leaders of both sides were ruthless and decisive. With just a few words, they had decided on a battle of life and death. Furthermore, at the moment when they made the decision, there was still a struggling Radiant Knight between them. There had never been a moment where the weight of a level 2 knight had become so light that it was difficult to notice his existence. Mary raised her head and let out an ear-piercing shriek that shocked the entire battlefield. Blood-colored wizard power instantly engulfed her. Amidst the trembling and violent blood-colored wizard power, Mary's red eyes released a frightening cold glint. 2 sharp fangs emerged from her upper lip. Her tall and slender body continued to expand, and strange blood-colored patterns began to spread unscrupulously on her fair body. Mary opened her mouth wide and let out a terrifying howl that sounded like that of a wild beast. The ends of her slender and long fingers began to grow rapidly, quickly turning into sharp and slightly curved claws. Fight! The leathery bat wings on Mary's back were stretched to the maximum. She was the first one to dive down after issuing a declaration of war while pointing at Intitch. Behind her, the Blood Knights with bat wings on their backs also raised their great swords and dove down. Accompanying them were hundreds of vampires that had transformed into vampire bats. What would happen when a group of vampires met a group of carrion beetles? The scene before their eyes gave them the answer. In an instant, blood splattered and limbs flew everywhere. The entire battlefield was a mess. In the first wave of head-on collision, the vampires were at a disadvantage. Their sharp fangs were almost harmless against the carrion beetle's hardened carapace that was as hard as heavy armor, whereas the vampires' light and nimble bodies were so fragile against the carrion beetle's sharp limbs and terrifying pincers, unable to withstand a single blow. Both sides crossed each other at an altitude of 10 meters. Other than the 8 Blood Knights, the rest of the vampires did not gain anything. Instead, it was the vampires themselves who suffered double-digit injuries from the carrion beetle's powerful counterattack. Bloody Witch Mary, who was leading the vampires' attack, was also bathed in blood. Her pretty face and fair body were covered in crisscrossing deep scratches. However, these external injuries did not dampen her spirit. Instead, they made her even more bloodthirsty and violent. The moment she charged through the carrion beetles, Her bloody claws pierced into the sinister mouthparts of two beetles, corroding their insides with terrifying blood energy. What this brought to her were her hands that were dripping with blood. It was as if her arms had plunged into a drum of knives. Her arms were covered with terrifying scratches of varying depths, so dense that it was hard to count them all. After charging past the carrion beetles, Mary next had to face the horrifying swarm of carrion beetles and Intich, who stood proudly in the middle. His body had already fused with the carrion beetles, making it difficult to distinguish which was his true body and which were just the insects under his control. Kakik, you want to kill me? Can you kill them all? The entire swarm is an extension of my body and will. If you want to kill me, you'll have to kill every last one of them. Kakik, can you do it? Intich stood proudly in the middle of the swarm and let out ear-piercing hisses that bordered on insanity. I can't kill them all. We'll know once we try. A cold glint shot out from Mary's bloody eyes. She made a grabbing motion in the air with her left hand, and a blood-colored longbow mysteriously appeared in her hand. She pulled the bowstring with her right hand and exerted force. A strange, glowing blood-colored arrow condensed on the bowstring. Bang! There was a sharp, explosive sound. The blood-colored arrow was still on the bowstring a second ago, but in the next second, it had already appeared in the middle of Intich's squirming body. Intich lowered his head in astonishment. In an instant, the violent blood energy within the blood-colored arrow burst forth. A red blood mist instantly engulfed everything within a 5-meter radius. This blood mist was obviously different from the blood mist condensed from blood water. It actually possessed a frightening corrosive power. Insect corpses fell with a rustle. All the parts of the front half of Intich's body that had been contaminated by the blood mist began to peel off. A thick layer of the black beetle corpses fell under his feet. However, as the sea of beetles surged on his body, the missing parts of his body condensed again. It was as if everything had returned to its original state before the attack. I've said before, you can't kill me. Intich raised his squirming black face and chuckled at Mary, who was 20 meters away. You've already attacked. Now, it's my turn. As soon as he finished speaking, Intich raised his right hand. A hole suddenly appeared in the palm of the beetles. Countless tiny flying insects shot out from the hole and rained down on Mary. Mary was a vampire magus who was known for her agility. How could you be hit by such a slow attack? Mary's body swayed slightly, leaving a series of eerie afterimages in the air. She quickly appeared 15 meters behind Intich's flank like a ghost and fired another blood-red arrow. Bang, bang, bang. Relying on her elusive figure, Mary made full use of her 8 points of dexterity to fly around Intich at high speed. She dodged the dense swarm of flying insects while accurately shooting blood-colored arrows into Intich's body. The sudden eruption of the blood mist immediately caused terrifying damage to Intich. Parts of his insect body were missing left and right. The insect corpses that rained down had even buried his calves. However, Intich didn't care about these injuries at all. He continued to spew out tiny, flying insects, as if he was using them to cover the surrounding space. Even with bloody witch Mary's speed, she couldn't completely avoid these flying insects. When the density of the flying insects reached a certain level, she couldn't avoid them even if she dodged in any direction. Blood-colored magic patterns rapidly circulated on the blood-colored battle armor. This also meant that it was suffering from countless repeated attacks at every moment. The bite of a single flying insect might be weak enough to be ignored, but when a thick layer of them landed on Mary's blood-colored battle armor, this kind of terrifying attack couldn't be ignored. Left with no choice, Mary had to erupt with blood every dozen or so times, using her violent blood energy to annihilate these obstructing insects on the surface of her body. Due to the lack of blood, Mary's blood-sucking regeneration ability was greatly suppressed. The wounds on the surface of her body healed abnormally slowly. This also caused her blood energy reserves to plummet. Chapter 335. Chance. A rare chance to escape. Soros couldn't figure out how the scene before him had happened. The only thing he knew was that when he was besieged by the swarm of carrion beetles and was almost at the end of his rope, his saviors, the vampires, had arrived. And so, two groups of monsters that had killed countless demon hunters fought right in front of his eyes, starting a bloody massacre. As for him, he was sandwiched in the middle, and the pressure he had to bear was much less than before. As long as he did not take the initiative to attack the monsters, they would kill each other until the sky was dark. They had no time to care about the prey that both sides were determined to get. Through the bloody battlefield, Soros could see the battle between the bloody witch and the terrifying insect demon from afar. Although both sides were weaker than him, the brutality of their battle shocked even a grade 2 knight like him. This was not a battle between humans at all, but a battle between monsters. The insect demon, which had an immortal body, was surrounded by tens of thousands of different types of insects. Its body was made up of countless squirming insects. Every time a part of its body was broken, it could put it back together in the shortest time possible. Soros could not imagine what kind of torture he would have to go through if he had to face such an opponent. It was not a battle against a human, but a battle against thousands of insects. Perhaps only the woman who was fighting it could understand the difference. Although he called her a woman, Soros had never really treated her as one. In Soros' memory, there had never been a woman like her. Her body and face were covered with crisscrossing wounds, her body bathed in blood, and yet she could still fight bravely against the swarm of insects. She was not a woman. She was the nightmare of all demon hunters, the bloody witch Mary. On the outskirts of the battlefield, hordes of vampire bats were fighting against the tide-like swarm of insects. Beside Soros, 8 blood knights who had lost their glory as human knights were fighting against the carrion beetles. And in the center of the battlefield was the duel between the bloody witch and the terrifying insect demon. Being sandwiched between layers of monsters, Radiant Knight Soros was on the verge of a mental breakdown. He did not dare to fight. If the monsters from both sides ganged up on him, even with his strength as a Tier 2 knight, he would find it difficult to endure. It was not a good idea to wait for the monsters to kill themselves. No matter which side won, they would not share the joy of victory with him. So, the tormented Soros could only carefully protect himself, waiting for the right moment to slip out of the battlefield bit by bit. However, how could it be so easy to avoid all the battles in such a chaotic battlefield? In a moment of carelessness, a black scorpion the size of a palm was trampled to death by him with a squeak, leaving behind a puddle of sticky purplish-black blood and a shriveled insect corpse. And this small mistake immediately attracted the combined attack of 2 corpse scarabs. Using the runic longsword to block left and right, Soros resisted the attacks of the insect's giant pincers and sharp appendages. He retreated as he fought, and in a moment of carelessness, his back knocked into a soft object. Turning around, Soros could not help but groan inwardly. Damn it, it was a vampire. This vampire only had the strength of a high-ranking acolyte, and it was struggling to defend against the attack of a beetle larva. Its body was already covered in wounds, and it was obviously at a disadvantage. At this moment, it suddenly noticed Soros and sensed the surging life force on his body. It immediately gave up on its opponent and pounced towards Soros recklessly. The low-ranking vampire opened its bloody mouth and bared its fangs, looking like it wanted to suck Soros's blood. Facing such an idiotic enemy, Soros could no longer express the hatred in his heart to others. 3 beetle larvae and a low-ranking vampire. Even if Soros closed his eyes and used only one hand, he would still be able to finish them off in an instant. If it was not to avoid attracting more enemies, who would be willing to play games with him here? Facing this reckless fool, Soros could only swing his sword, and with a flash of his sword, he sliced it into pieces. As expected, the screams of the vampires before their deaths brought new trouble to Soros. 2 quasi-wizard-level vampires charged at him at high speed, sticking close to the ground. Their target was him, the culprit. Seeing that he could no longer hide, Radiant Knight Soros roared angrily. Light surged around his body, and the dazzling light once again lit up the runic longsword. The violent runic energy swung along with the longsword, instantly killing all the monsters around him. Soros took the opportunity to escape. A pair of insects blocked his way. Killed. A group of insects blocked his way. Still killed. The swarm of vampires swarmed towards him from all directions. Violent energy blades flew everywhere, killing all of them. At this moment of life and death, Soros no longer dared to hold back. He squeezed out every drop of runic energy in his body, condensing them at the tip of his sword, and madly slashed at every enemy that approached him, until a terrifying scarlet figure appeared in front of him. Soros stopped swinging his longsword. His broad chest was panting heavily. His muscles were covered with beads of sweat and various kinds of stinky blood of unknown origin. In front of him, the terrifying Bloody Witch Mary was flapping her huge leathery bat wings and slowly descending from the sky, blocking his escape route. Soros could not see Mary's condition clearly from the chaotic battlefield just now. Now, there was a distance of 10 meters between them. There was no one between them, and he could finally see everything clearly. So miserable, so miserable. Although Mary used to have an impressive figure and an extremely beautiful face, now, the thin blood mist protecting her body could no longer completely cover her body. Her delicate face that was exposed outside the blood mist was covered with scratches of different depths. The curled wounds had turned purple, but strangely, not a single drop of blood seeped out. The face that was once so beautiful had now become vicious and terrifying, causing one to be unable to look directly at it. On the other hand, Mary's slender body was also riddled with scars and covered with terrifying wounds. As for the blood-red armor protecting her body, it was riddled with holes from the millions of flying insects. It could no longer provide any protection, but this was not a big deal. The most frightening thing was that the surging blood wizard power in Mary's body was now dispirited and almost dried up. Mary stood in front of Soros, her scarlet eyes staring straight at him. There was an unconcealable thirst and greed in her eyes. Such a blatant and unwavering gaze was enough to make one's heart tremble in fear. Mary clearly only had the strength of a level 1 Radiant Knight, and was even in a state of exhaustion from the blood battle. But under the gaze of her terrifying bloodshot eyes, Soros, a level 2 Radiant Knight, could not help but feel a chill in his heart. A trace of fear appeared in his eyes. Between the predator and the prey, it was sometimes difficult to measure the difference in size and strength. The moment their gazes met, it was clear who was the prey and who was the predator. "Mary, do you think I'll allow you to calmly absorb my blood to recover in front of me?" Behind Soros, the swarm of insects surged, and the evil insect in Tech's strange body appeared. "We're both exhausted now, but I have the body of an insect, and you have the blood arrows. If we continue fighting, let's see who falls first. As for replenishing your blood, don't even think about it." Within Tech's threat, the ground around Soros shattered, and even more tiny beetles swarmed out of the ground. In an instant, the sound of carapace rubbing against each other could be heard everywhere. "Damn it, damn it, damn it. You two monsters can fight all you want. Why are you crowding around me? Do you think I, a Radiant Knight, am easy to bully?" At this moment, the hatred in Soros' heart was at its peak. But with the bloody sorceress Mary in front of him and the terrifying insect demon in Tech behind him, he could only retract his aura and focus, preparing to deal with any surprise attacks from both sides. After all, the rune energy in his body was about to dry up. For a moment, the three powerhouses were in a stalemate. As a vampire, as long as she had the chance to lie on Soros' body and suck a little bit, Mary would immediately become lively again and suppress that damned insect. But if she couldn't take down that grade 2 knight immediately, and Tech ambushed her from the side, even with Mary's valiance, she didn't dare to imagine the terrible consequences of facing a grade 2 knight and a powerful insect demon at the same time. Sensing Mary's hesitation, The evil insect in tech revealed a sinister smile on his ugly face. But at this moment, the three of them simultaneously sensed something. They looked up at the sky, and their expressions instantly changed. In the sky, the vampire bat that Venlier had transformed into was struggling to drag a burly human knight, barely hovering 50 meters above the ground. "Master, I brought your food." Just as he spoke, the bat and the human started falling. After all, strength wasn't the forte of vampires. For a vampire bat the size of a wash basin to drag a burly man weighing more than 100 kilograms and fly hundreds of meters. No matter how one looked at it, it seemed strange and out of place. However, the three of them didn't have the time to think about anything else. Almost the instant they saw the bat and the unconscious knight, the three of them reacted instinctively. "You're courting death." With a loud shout, Intek, who was both shocked and furious, raised his hands up high. Strange flying insects that were as dense as black clouds gushed out of his body, heading straight for the human knight in the sky. The radiant knight Soros also swung his greatsword, and a lightning-fast energy blade tore through the air, looking like it was going to cleave the two of them in half. But even though they were fast, a red figure was even faster. Chapter 336. For a moment, the battlefield fell silent. All the creatures engaged in battle couldn't help but raise their heads to look at the red figure that was slowly rising in the sky. Under the clear blue sky, a beautiful scene appeared before everyone's eyes. A beautiful blood-red figure was hugging a majestic knight, leaning against his chest. Giant leathery bat wings spread open, supporting the two of them as they slowly rotated in midair. A beauty and a knight. One delicate, one majestic. The strong visual contrast between the handsome man and the beautiful woman, who were of vastly different physiques, gave off a surreal feeling. One couldn't help but wonder if there was something wrong with their eyes. As one of the participants in today's battle, the evil worm Intik hated the scene in the sky the most. If not for the fact that he was worried that rashly charging forward might result in a painful defeat, he would have long lost control of his tyrannical mood and start a massacre. The bloody which Mary and the handsome knights snuggling had no hint of romance or beauty. Instead, it was filled with the wails of death and the withering of life. Mary's sharp fangs pierced into the other party's carotid artery. Fresh blood flowed through her hollow fangs and into her body, causing her previously dispirited blood wizard power to instantly swell and surge again. Miraculously, the wounds on Mary's body quickly closed, formed scabs, and healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. Soon, as a blood-red ring of light swept across her body, all of the injuries Mary had just suffered disappeared. Even her skin had become tender and translucent once again, with a faint blush of blood and chi on it. Damn vampires. Terrifying vampires. As long as there was a blood source, and as long as the vampires didn't die instantly, they could rely on sucking blood to recover from any injuries they suffered. This was the most powerful and heaven-defying aspect of the vampires. After a quarter of an hour, Mary casually loosened her arms, and a shriveled corpse fell lightly from the sky. Mary stuck out her nimble tongue and licked the bloodstain at the corner of her lips. She lowered her body and looked at the expressionless Intik standing on the ground. She pointed her finger and shouted, "Kill." Thus, the battle that had just cooled down erupted once again. "Mary, don't think that I'm afraid of you." Intik stuttered when he said a very normal sentence. This was not because he was afraid, but because 3 blood-red arrows had penetrated his insect body, blowing him up into pieces. Terrifying holes were blasted open time and time again, but they were quickly repaired again and again. Intich grabbed a carrion beetle and used it as a shield to block Mary's relentless barrage. Meanwhile, he condensed insect spears made of squirming beetles with his other hand and threw them at his opponent with all his might. Even though both sides had suffered casualties, Intik already had the intention to retreat. It couldn't be helped. Every time he repaired the corpse scarab's body, he would have to expend a portion of his spiritual force, and commanding the corpse scarabs to fight also took a toll on his spiritual force. If there were too few of them, his spiritual power might be able to hold on for a while longer, but once an all-out war broke out, his spiritual power would not be able to keep up. Of course, if Mary hadn't replenished her blood and flesh along the way, it wouldn't have been a problem for the demonic worm, Indic, to exhaust Mary to death. After all, with the insect queen by his side, he could save a lot of spiritual power when commanding the carrion beetles compared to ordinary summoners. But there weren't that many buts. When Mary absorbed all the blood of a Tier 2 knight, the scales of victory and defeat in today's battle had been tipped. A Tier 2 knight was a bargaining chip that could not be ignored, no matter where it was placed. Mary was willing to use a Tier 2 knight as a bargaining chip in a daily conflict, and the demonic worm, Intik, was destined to lose today. Hence, after glaring at Mary hatefully, Intik, who had taken root in the swarm of beetles, whistled and retreated with his remaining subordinates. The swarm of beetles retreated to the opened wormhole. One by one, the carrion beetles flapped their green wings as they fought and retreated, finally entering the wormhole safely. After a simple inspection of his subordinates, Intik felt like he was in so much pain that he wanted to die. Of the 34 carrion beetles that he had painstakingly gathered after half a year of hard work, only 23 returned after this battle. This also meant that 1/3 of the carrion beetles had died on this godforsaken battlefield. After all the beetles had retreated underground, Intik dejectedly dispersed his body, disintegrating into countless tiny beetles that entered the wormhole. The vampires did not interfere much with the retreat of the swarm of beetles. They only seized the time to clean up the remnants of Intik's troops on the surface. As for the foolishness of charging underground to continue the pursuit, Mary would not do such a thing unless she was out of her mind. Perhaps that demonic worm, Intik, was hoping that she would do such a thing. After the swarm of beetles had completely disappeared, the only ones left on the surface of the mountain forest were the hordes of vampires. Soros, who had wanted to seize the opportunity to escape, was also surrounded by 2 Tier 2 blood knights. His face was deathly pale as he waited for his final fate. Looking at Mary, who was flapping her leathery bat wings as she slowly floated towards him, and then at his 2 former partners, who were sandwiched between him, Soros mustered the courage to self-destruct countless times. But each time, his body would mysteriously fail amidst the trembling of his body. A figure flapping his wings could be heard. Winlier descended from the sky and transformed into a cultured and elegant middle-aged noble before Soros. Ever since he became a vampire, Winlier's life had unknowingly extended by a lot. As a human, his life might have come to an end, but as a vampire, his long life had just entered the beautiful prime of his life. That was why, after experiencing a life of growing old and strong, he threw himself into the embrace of the vampires without hesitation, becoming the first native to completely accept the transformation of a vampire, both physically and mentally. Esteemed Lord Soros, I believe you understand the current situation. Do you still intend to use your life to continue fighting against us, the great vampires? As long as you are willing to give up your weak human body and join the ranks of the vampires, I, Winlier, am willing to introduce you to Her Majesty Mary. Winlier stopped 10 steps away from Soros with a face full of smiles. He rubbed his hands and began to show off his eloquence. I'd rather die than become a muddle-headed puppet like them. Soros roared as he swung his sword. Although his voice was fierce, there was a hint of weakness in his words. Winlier laughed even more merrily. Lord Soros, this is something you don't know. If you are extremely against becoming a vampire, then when Her Majesty Mary spent her energy on the embrace, it would inevitably damage your intelligence. But if you are willing to accept it from the bottom of your heart, then you can be like me. Not only will you retain your complete consciousness, but you will also be able to enjoy the long and strange journey of life. Is that true? Soros asked with a trembling voice. His hand holding the sword could not help but tremble. When he asked the first half of the question, he was still looking at Winlier, but when he said the last two words, his eyes involuntarily drifted to the bloody, which Mary, who was floating proudly in the air. As long as you sincerely submit to me and become my slave, then I will allow you to retain your complete consciousness and all your abilities. Make your choice, Soros. Mary's words were still as fierce as she was, and she did not allow the slightest bit of hesitation. After gritting his teeth for a moment, the Grade 2 Radiant Knight Soros finally lowered his head and threw away the sword in his hand. He knelt on one leg and said in a muffled voice, "I, Soros, am willing to submit." Mary's blood-red eyes shone with excitement and joy. She slowly lowered her body and nodded to Winlier, who was standing beside her. "Go, tell them to clean up the battlefield." "Yes." Winlier was overjoyed. He bowed and turned to leave. Mary's words had undoubtedly affirmed his value. It also indicated that he now had the authority to command all the vampires except for the 5 Blood Knights, 3 of whom had died in battle. For Winlier, who was naturally not good at fighting, this was a huge leap forward. After Winlier left, Mary strolled in front of Soros and bent down to stare at him. Meanwhile, the 2 Tier 2 Blood Knights stared intently at Soros from both sides. If Soros made any sudden movements, the swords in their hands would mercilessly cut him down. "Raise your head," Mary said coldly. Soros obeyed and raised his head. His eyes met with Mary's blood-red eyes. "Remember, only when you accept the embrace wholeheartedly will you be able to retain your complete intelligence. So now, open your heart." Mary extended her sharp fingertip and carved a witchcraft mark on Soros' forehead that represented her. Blood flowed down Soros' face. "I'm willing, I'm willing, I'm willing," Soros repeated over and over again. His voice was hoarse and muffled, but his strong will was undeniable. At that moment, Mary's sharp fingertip slid across her wrist. A stream of dark red blood immediately came out. Mary lowered her arm and let the blood drip from her fingertip onto the witchcraft mark on Soros' forehead. Strangely, when Mary's blood mixed with Soros' blood, it actually lit up the witchcraft mark. Sizzling sounds of corrosion could be heard from the bloodstains, and it started to etch deeply into Soros' skull through his flesh. Every drop of blood that landed on the mark was like boiling lava. It was so hot that Soros' body trembled and his face contorted. However, he did not move recklessly and quietly endured the strange transformation of the vampire. A powerful blood energy seeped into his body, corroding and modifying all the flesh, tissues, and organs in its path with an unstoppable force. If Soros had used his runic energy to resist it, the transformation process would not have been so smooth and peaceful. But when the strange blood energy corroded into the nodes where the runic energy converged, the intense pain caused Soros to howl in pain. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.